Hey there, story lovers. This is Gringotts Hub, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Gringotts ritual revealed Harry was the sovereign of magic and every pureblood lord was forced to kneel? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Weight of Old Names. The letter from Gringotts arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry thought was a deeply unromantic way for his life to change forever. It was written on parchment the color of old bone, sealed with wax the deep red of garnets, and stamped with the Gringotts crest, a dragon coiled around a mountain of gold, wings spread, eyes open. The script inside was precise and angular, the kind of handwriting that didn't waste a single stroke. Mr. H. J. Potter, you are hereby formally invited to attend a comprehensive inheritance audit at Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, London, on the occasion of your 16th birthday. This audit is not optional. The nature of your accounts requires immediate assessment. Transport arrangements have been made. A goblin escort will arrive at your current residence at 9 o'clock in the morning. Do not be late. Ragnarok, Director, Gringotts Bank. Harry read it twice, sitting on the edge of his bed in the smallest bedroom of number 4, Privet Drive, with the window cracked open and the smell of his aunt's roses drifting in. The Dursleys had stopped pretending to care about his comings and goings after the incident with Mad Eye Moody's magical eye 2 summers ago. These days, Uncle Vernon mostly just avoided looking at him directly, which suited Harry fine. He folded the letter, tucked it into the pocket of his jeans, and started getting dressed. He didn't tell anyone. Not Hermione, not Ron, not the Order members who had been rotating in shifts outside the house since school let out. They would want to discuss it, prepare for it, assign him a chaperone, and then Dumbledore would want to be notified, and then there would be a meeting, and 3 days would turn into a week. Harry was 16 years old today. He had watched Cedric Diggory die, he had watched Sirius fall through a curtain of shadow, and he was done waiting for permission. The goblin escort arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, 2 of them, short and sharp-featured, wearing the dark green uniforms of senior Gringotts officials rather than the standard teller's robes. They didn't knock. One of them simply appeared at his bedroom door, which Harry suspected said something very pointed about goblin attitudes toward Muggle locks. Mr. Potter, the taller one said. His voice was like gravel being poured onto marble. I am Griphook Superior. My name is Sharpclaw. This is my associate, Ironforge. We are here to escort you to the bank. Right, Harry said. He grabbed his wand from the nightstand and slid it into his sleeve. Let's go. Sharpclaw's eyes tracked the wand movement and something shifted in his expression, not quite approval, but something adjacent to it. A kind of recalibration. Like he had expected the boy to ask questions first and had been prepared to be impatient about it. They didn't take a car or the night bus. Sharpclaw produced a small bronze medallion from his breast pocket, pressed it into Harry's hand, and said, "Hold this and don't let go." The world compressed, twisted, and then exhaled, and Harry was standing in a room he had never seen before, deep beneath Gringotts, he suspected, given the carved stone walls and the absolute silence and the torches burning in iron brackets with green-gold flames that didn't flicker. There was a stone table in the center of the room, circular, covered in runes so dense they looked almost like a texture rather than individual symbols. A basin sat at its center, shallow and wide, filled with something that wasn't quite water. It caught the torchlight in ways water shouldn't, almost like it was thinking about it first. 7 goblins were already in the room, standing at measured intervals around the table. They were all older than Sharpclaw, Harry thought, or at least they carried themselves with the particular gravity of people who have been important for a very long time. Ragnarok, the director, stood directly opposite the doorway. Harry recognized him from a portrait in the main bank. He was taller than average for a goblin, with a long angular face, silver hair pulled back from sharp ears, and eyes the color of hammered copper. He looked at Harry the way cartographers look at an unmapped coastline, with intense professional interest and a carefully contained sense of occasion. Mr. Potter, Ragnarok said. Thank you for coming promptly. Your letter said don't be late, Harry said. So I wasn't. Something moved at the corner of Ragnarok's mouth. Sit, please. There was one chair at the table, high-backed, carved from something dark, set on Harry's side of the basin. Harry sat. Sharpclaw and Ironforge moved to positions along the wall. Everyone in the room was very still and very quiet in the way that suggested they had all been briefed extensively and told not to react to whatever happened next. That, more than anything, made Harry pay attention. "What is this ritual, exactly?" he asked. "A comprehensive inheritance audit," Ragnarok said, "encompasses 3 phases. The first establishes your existing accounts and assets. The second identifies any blocks, seals, or magical modifications to your person or bloodline. The third," he paused, "precisely. The third is activated only under specific conditions. We do not anticipate it. But we are prepared for it." "Prepared how?" "Everyone in this room has signed a blood oath of discretion," Ragnarok said simply. "Whatever occurs here stays within Gringotts until you choose otherwise." Harry looked at the goblins around the table. They looked back, steady and unreadable. He thought about asking more questions and then decided there wasn't much point. He'd learn more from the ritual itself than from whatever carefully diplomatic answers Ragnarok had prepared. "All right," he said. "What do I do?" "Place your right hand over the basin. A single drop of blood is required. The basin will do the rest." Harry pulled out the small ritual knife Sharpclaw had placed on the table when Harry wasn't looking, either a prepared gesture or goblins were just very efficient, and pressed the tip to his index finger. The cut was shallow, quick. A single bead of red welled up and fell into the basin. The basin didn't glow. It didn't bubble or shimmer or produce a dramatic column of light. What it did was exhale, a low, subsonic pulse that Harry felt in his teeth and behind his sternum rather than heard, and then the surface of the liquid went perfectly, absolutely still. Like glass. Like a mirror facing down into something deeper than the floor. Words began rising through it, dark letters surfacing from beneath like fish rising to feeding, account names, vault numbers, balances in denominations Harry didn't recognize alongside ones he did. Potter Family Vault, a number with more digits than he had expected. A secondary vault he hadn't known about, labeled Peveril Legacy Trust, sealed since 1247. A third, labeled only HJP, held in suspension. "What's the held in suspension vault?" Harry asked. "Assets frozen pending resolution of a contested inheritance claim," Ragnarok said. "Filed originally in 1981. The claim was never resolved because the claimant, your maternal grandmother's magical estate, held in trust by the ministry, was never properly audited. The ministry has been drawing interest on it for 15 years. Harry stared at him. "The ministry has been taking money from my vault. Technically, from a vault they claimed was unclaimed. The distinction matters legally." "It will matter less," Ragnarok said, with the careful neutrality of someone thoroughly enjoying themselves, "once this audit is complete." The second phase started without ceremony. The surface of the basin cleared, and then a new set of symbols began rising, different in character from the account listings, more complex, almost biological in their branching patterns. Like a family tree, except it extended in directions family trees weren't supposed to go. And then it stopped. Every symbol in the basin froze mid-surface. The green-gold flames in the torches stopped flickering. The 7 goblins around the table went absolutely rigid, and Ragnarok's copper eyes went wide in a way that suggested the director of Gringotts was not a man who went wide-eyed easily. "What is it?" Harry said. Ragnarok didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the basin with an expression that Harry could only describe as wrestling with professional obligation and losing badly. "The second phase," Ragnarok said slowly, "has identified 17 separate magical seals on your person and bloodline. 12 were placed by Albus Dumbledore. 4 were placed by individuals unknown, consistent with Death Eater ritual signatures. 1, he stopped. 1 what? 1 was placed by magic itself," Ragnarok said. "As a protection. Not a suppression." He looked up from the basin and met Harry's eyes. "Mr. Potter, Are you aware of the Sovereignty Protocol? No. It is the oldest standing magical law in Britain, older than the Ministry, older than the Wisengamot, older than the Hogwarts Charter. It was written into the fabric of British magical reality by Merlin Ambrosius in the 9th century, as a failsafe. Ragnarok's voice had taken on a quality Harry couldn't quite name, not reverence, exactly, but something close to it. The tone of a man reciting something he had memorized long ago and never expected to actually use. In the event that the governing structures of magical Britain became so corrupt, so unjust, or so disconnected from the fundamental nature of magic itself that they threatened the survival of the magical community, the protocol would identify a sovereign, a witch or wizard of sufficient bloodline, power, and character to hold authority above all existing structures. Harry was very quiet for a moment. That's what the third phase is, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And the conditions that activate it have been met, Ragnarok confirmed. The torches went back to burning. The basin's surface moved again, and what came up this time wasn't words or symbols or a family tree. It was a crest Harry had never seen, a stag and a doe facing each other across a drawn sword, with a lightning bolt above, and beneath, in Latin so old the letters looked almost Saxon, Magici Rex et Iudex. Sovereign and Judge of Magic. The seal protecting this bloodline was placed there to prevent it from being identified and targeted before the right time, Ragnarok said. It was placed by the protocol itself, an automatic function. It has now been removed, because the time is now. He paused. We must proceed to the third phase, Mr. Potter. It cannot be stopped once the second phase has identified the sovereignty. Attempting to halt it would cause catastrophic magical feedback. I wasn't going to stop it, Harry said. He placed his hand back over the basin. The third phase was not subtle. The pulse that had been subsonic before became audible, a deep, resonant tone that Harry felt in his spine, his jaw, his fingers, the roots of his hair. The runes on the table lit up in sequence, one after another, faster and faster until they were all blazing simultaneously in that same green-gold color as the torches. The liquid in the basin rose without spilling, forming a column that reached Harry's eye level and then spread outward, thin as silk, forming a curtain of shimmering light that wrapped around him and then contracted inward until it was absorbed through his skin in one long, slow breath. And then Harry felt everything. It was not painful. That was the first thing. He had been bracing for pain, because most things in his life that changed him had hurt first. But this wasn't pain. This was the feeling of a door being opened. Not installed, opened. As if it had always been there, built into the architecture of whatever he was made of, and someone had just found the handle. Power moved through him like water through newly cleared pipes, sudden, rushing, immense, and then settling into something steady and natural and entirely his. He could feel the magic in the room, the torches, the runes, the goblin's own magic, the deep hum of the wards in the bedrock beneath the bank. He could feel it the way you feel temperature, ambient and constant and informative. He could feel, distantly, like the difference in pressure before a storm, the magical signatures of every person in Diagon Alley above him. And further. Stretching. The grid of magical Britain like a map drawn in light and heat, and somewhere on that map, in a dozen different locations, something was happening. The pureblood lords of Britain were on their knees. Harry knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat, not because anyone told him, but because the protocol was now part of him and the protocol kept records. He could feel the compulsion moving through every lord of the sacred 28 like a current through wire, old magic, absolute magic, the kind that didn't ask permission and didn't accept arguments. Lucius Malfoy in his manor. Lord not at his estate. The Greengrasses, the Parkinsons, the Bulstrodes, the Carrows, the Blacks through their remaining lines. 12 lords and 6 ladies, on their knees in their own homes at 9:47 in the morning, and none of them understanding why. Harry opened his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd closed them. Every goblin in the room was bowing. Not the slight incline of professional courtesy that goblins gave to wealthy clients. They were bent at the waist, arms at their sides, heads low, a posture Harry suspected no goblin had assumed in front of a human being since before the Statute of Secrecy. Ragnar himself held the bow a full 3 seconds before straightening. When the director of Gringotts looked at Harry again, the copper eyes held something new. Not submission, goblins, Harry already understood, were not built for submission. But recognition. The acknowledgement of a power that predated and superseded the current arrangement, from a people who respected old power above all things. Sovereign, Ragnar said. One word. No performance around it, no ceremony. Just the word, placed in the air between them like a stone on a table. Don't, Harry said. Not unkindly. Call me Harry. What comes next? Ragnar straightened fully and something in the room relaxed, or shifted, more accurately, from ceremonial gravity to working gravity. First, we complete the audit. You have a right to know everything that has been done to your accounts and your person. Then let's hear it. They went through it methodically, Ragnar reading from the basin's disclosures while Sharpclaw took notes and Ironforge produced documents from a leather satchel that seemed to hold considerably more than its dimensions suggested. The 17 seals came off one by one as they were catalogued. Harry felt each removal as a small distinct click somewhere between his ribs and his spine, the sensation of something tight becoming loose. 12 Dumbledore seals, confirmed and documented, each one labeled in Gringotts records with a date and a purpose. The earliest had been placed when Harry was 15 months old. The latest was from the summer before his 5th year. They covered his magical core, blocked to roughly 40% capacity from age 2. His Parselmouth ability, which had not been given to him by Voldemort's curse as the wizarding world believed, but was a natural Potter inheritance from a Slytherin ancestral line 6 generations back, obscured by one of Dumbledore's seals. His connection to the wards of Potter properties, 11 properties, not the one cottage in Godric's Hollow that Harry had always assumed was the entirety of his family's holdings. 11 properties. The largest of which was Sovereign's Rest in Wiltshire, a manor house that had been unoccupied since 1943 and, Harry's jaw tightened when he heard this, had been quietly occupied since 1978 by a cadet branch of the Selwyn family, who had been paying no rent to any Potter account and had been drawing on the manor's considerable magical resources to supplement their own power base. They've been living in my house for 18 years, Harry said. Technically, they have been occupying your house for 18 years, Sharpclaw said. They hold no legal title. They relied on the Potter accounts being sealed and the heir being too young and uninformed to pursue the matter. A reasonable gamble, he added, with goblin pragmatism, that has now concluded. I want them out by end of business today, Harry said. Sharpclaw made a note. Easily done. The manor's wards will recognize you as rightful owner. You may take physical possession at any time. We can arrange a formal notice of vacancy through the sovereign's authority, no ministry involvement required, no legal challenge possible. Do it. The financial picture was, Harry didn't have another word for it, enormous. The Potter vault was substantial, but the Peveril Legacy Trust dwarfed it. The Peveril family had been accumulating wealth and magical assets since the 11th century, and the trust had continued accruing interest through the entirety of the time Harry had been alive. The ministry's unauthorized use of the held-in-suspension vault had amounted to a theft of approximately 40,000 galleons over 15 years, which Ragnar informed Harry that Gringotts would pursue for recovery on his behalf as a courtesy, in light of the morning's events. What do you get out of that? Harry asked directly. Ragnar met his eyes without blinking. The gratitude of the Sovereign of Magic is not a small thing, Mr. Potter. The Goblin Nation has been seeking full legal personhood under British magical law for 300 years. The Sovereignty Protocol supersedes the current ministry charter. You have the authority to grant it. Consider it granted, Harry said. Draft the language and I'll sign it. I'll want Hermione Granger to look at it first, she's thorough. The Muggle-born. Ragnar said it without any particular inflection. The best magical legal mind I know, Harry said, equally flat. Is that a problem? No, Ragnar said, and for the first time, the corner of his mouth moved in what was definitely, unmistakably, a very small smile. No problem whatsoever. The matter of Dumbledore's seals hung in the room like smoke, present, acknowledged, not yet addressed. I'm not doing anything about Dumbledore today, Harry said, when the audit was complete and the documents were being organized into a stack that Sharpclaw had begun labeling with precise, tiny script. I need to think about that. Understood, Ragnar said. But I want copies of everything. Every seal, every date, every stated purpose in the goblin records. And I want the vaults that have been funding Death Eater operations frozen. There was a pause. You are aware, Ragnar said carefully, that several of those vaults belong to members of the Sacred 28 and prominent ministry donors. I'm aware, Harry said. Freeze them. Under what authority does Gringotts need to act, exactly, when the Sovereign of Magic gives a direct instruction? Ragnar considered this for precisely 2 seconds. None other than your word. Then you have my word. Malfoy family vaults, not family vaults, the Lestrange accounts that haven't already been seized, freeze them. Don't remove funds. Just freeze. I want them to feel it before they know why. Sharpclaw stopped writing and looked up. That is, he appeared to search for the word. That is a strategically elegant approach. I spent 5 years watching Dumbledore play chess with people's lives, Harry said. I paid attention. He stood up from the chair. The room felt different than it had when he sat down, smaller, somehow, without being less significant. The power that had settled into him in the third phase was still there, quiet and vast, like a river that had found its proper banks. Not straining. Not threatening to overflow. Just present, and steady, and entirely his. One more thing, Harry said, turning back to Ragnar. Sirius Black. Does Gringotts hold any documentation related to his arrest and imprisonment? The Black family vaults are among the oldest in our institution, Ragnar said. Yes. There are records. He was never given a trial, Harry said. I want that documented. Officially. As part of the sovereignty record. It will be. And the ministry holds assets frozen from the Black estate pending his criminal status. I want those unlocked and transferred to his direct account. It will require that I said so, Harry said. Not harsh. Just clear. He's innocent. Everyone who knows anything about what happened that night knows he's innocent. The ministry has been too cowardly and too corrupt to fix it. I'm fixing it. He paused. Can you contact him through the Gringotts network without the ministry intercepting? Gringotts communications are fully warded against ministry surveillance, Ragnar confirmed, with a tone suggesting the idea of ministry access to Gringotts' private channels was slightly offensive. Tell him his vaults are unlocked, he's been formally documented as innocent by sovereign decree, and I'd like to meet at Sovereign's Rest in Wiltshire in 3 days. He'll know what that means. And if he asks who authorized this? Harry picked up his wand from the table and slid it back into his sleeve. Tell him his godson did. He'll probably fall off whatever he's sitting on. He walked toward the door and then stopped, because Ragnar had moved, not dramatically, just a single step forward, which in the contained space of the room was a gesture with weight. Sovereign, the director said, and when Harry looked at him, Ragnar's expression was something Harry found he hadn't expected from a goblin, straightforward, unperformed sincerity. For what it is worth, the goblin nation has waited a very long time for this morning. How long? Harry asked. Since 1612, Ragnar said. The last time the protocol was triggered. The potential sovereign of that era declined to accept the mantle. He was afraid of it. Harry looked at him for a moment. Afraid of being responsible for everyone, or afraid of what everyone would do once they knew. Ragnar's copper eyes were steady. Both, I believe. Can't afford either of those, Harry said. Not anymore. He walked out. The journey back up through the bank was different from the journey down. Sharpclaw and Ironforge flanked him as before, but the goblins they passed in the corridors and behind the counters reacted with a stillness that moved ahead of him like a wave, not stopping work, exactly, but the heads turning, the sharp features registering something, and in some cases the brief, precise incline that among goblins was, Harry now understood, the closest thing to an acknowledgement of authority they offered. He walked through the marble lobby of Gringotts and out through the bronze doors into Diagon Alley and the morning sunshine, and stood for a moment on the white stone steps while the world went about its business around him. Diagon Alley in July had a particular energy. Schoolist shopping season hadn't quite started yet, so it was the regulars rather than the crowds, the people who worked here or lived nearby or came every week. Witches in summer robes, wizards in shirt sleeves, a pair of young children pulling their grandmother toward the ice cream parlor. A copy of the Daily Prophet rotating slowly in the window of a newsstand, the headline something about ministry budget adjustments that Harry didn't bother reading. None of them knew yet. The Pureblood lords who had been on their knees 20 minutes ago would be on their feet now, because the compulsion was not ongoing, it was a single event, a marking, a message from the protocol. This has happened. This is real. The sovereign lives. They would be confused, shaken, furious, or some combination of all three. Within hours, the rumor networks that the Sacred 28 ran through owls and flue calls and drawing room visits would be alive with it. By tonight, some of them would know what had happened, or at least have enough pieces to guess. Harry had perhaps 12 hours before everything got complicated. He found a quiet corner off the main alley, behind Madame Malkin's, where a narrow lane ran between the robe shop and a herbalist's with bunches of drying plants hanging in the window. He sent 2 owls, both belonging to Gringotts, both warded, to Hermione and Ron with identical messages, "Need you. Not optional. I'll explain everything, but I need you to trust me for about an hour first. Can you come to Diagon Alley?" Then he went to Florian Fortescue's, sat at an outdoor table in the sun, and ordered a bowl of honeycomb ice cream that was absolutely enormous, and he ate it while the mundane world moved around him, and he thought. Dumbledore was the problem he was going to have to solve carefully. The anger was there, not burning, but real and documented, sitting in a stack of Gringotts parchment with dates and purposes and the precise magical signatures of 12 deliberate decisions to keep Harry smaller than he was supposed to be. Harry thought about each of those seals and what they had cost him, years of magical development, the full range of his own abilities, a connection to properties and inheritance and identity that had been quietly excised while Dumbledore smiled and offered him lemon drops and talked about the greater good. He understood why. That was the complicated part. Dumbledore had been afraid that Voldemort would feel it if Harry's full power came online, that the connection between them would transmit the signal. He had been trying to keep Harry safe by keeping Harry small. The logic was not insane. The execution was a 17-year violation of Harry's magical sovereignty that had nearly gotten him killed at least twice by leaving him under-equipped for situations Dumbledore had known were coming. Being able to understand someone's reasoning and still be furious at them for it, that, Harry thought, was one of the more genuinely adult things he had encountered. He finished his ice cream and went back to the steps of Gringotts to wait for his friends. Hermione arrived first, slightly flushed, with a book under her arm that Harry suspected she had been reading before his owl arrived, and wearing the expression she reserved for situations she had classified as urgent but not yet understood. Ron was 2 minutes behind her, slightly windswept, with a smear of something that might have been jam on his left sleeve and the general appearance of someone who had come very quickly and grabbed his wand on the way out the door. "What's happened?" Hermione said, scanning him with the intensity of someone looking for injuries or signs of curse damage. "You're not hurt," Ron said, also scanning, because Ron had learned over 5 years that, "I need you to trust me for an hour," from Harry meant something had either happened or was about to. "That's good. That's a good start." "I'm not hurt," Harry confirmed. He looked at both of them, Hermione's sharp, intelligent, worried eyes and Ron's open, honest face with its current expression of determined readiness, and he felt something settle in him that the power and the ritual and the morning's events hadn't quite touched. These 2 people. I need somewhere private, he said. Not the leaky cauldron, too many ears. Is there somewhere we can go? There's the room above Gringotts East Annex, Hermione said immediately. They rent it for private magical consultations. I read about it in magical contracts and their proper venues, it's warded against eavesdropping. Harry blinked at her. Of course you know that. Is someone following us? Ron asked, already scanning the alley with his hand near his wand. Not yet, Harry said. But it's July, it's my birthday, and the last few hours have been, he paused, looking for the word. Significant. They got the room above the East Annex, which was indeed warded within an inch of its life and smelled like old wood and metal polish, with two narrow windows overlooking the alley and chairs that were more comfortable than they looked. Hermione conjured a privacy ward on top of the existing ones out of what appeared to be pure habit, and Ron put his wand on the table in the manner of someone ready to pick it up quickly, and they both looked at Harry. He told them everything. All of it, from the letter to the basin to the 17 seals to Sovereign's Rest to the frozen vaults to Sirius. He told them about the Sovereignty Protocol and what it meant and what he had felt during the third phase and the Pureblood lords on their knees. He kept his voice steady and level and as factual as he could manage, because what he needed right now wasn't their alarm, there would be time for alarm, he needed their thinking. When he finished, there was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. Then Hermione said, Dumbledore placed 12 seals on you since you were 15 months old. Yes. He, without your consent, suppressed your magical core for 15 years. Yes. And has been withholding information about your family's actual status and holdings since I got my Hogwarts letter, based on the dates. Probably before. Hermione stood up, which she did when she was processing something too large to sit through, and walked to the window and stared at the alley below with an expression of concentrated fury that Harry found quietly terrifying and quietly reassuring in equal measure. Ron was looking at Harry with an expression that was harder to read, working through something, Harry could tell, something that went deeper than the immediate shock. The Pureblood lords, Ron said. All of them. All active lords of the Sacred 28 who are still living. My dad, Ron said. Harry blinked. He hadn't thought of that. Arthur Weasley held no lordship, had no formal standing in the Sacred 28, the Weasley family having been removed from that particular social roster by several generations of marrying Muggleborns and generally failing to be sufficiently awful. Your dad wasn't included, Harry said. The compulsion only applied to the active lords. The Sacred 28 with a current recognized head. Your family isn't, your dad doesn't hold that title. Ron exhaled. Right. Okay. He was quiet for a moment. Malfoy, though. Malfoy. Ron looked up. How'd that feel? And Harry, despite everything, despite the 17 seals and the stolen money and the occupied manor house and the enormous weight of an ancient magical sovereignty settling into his bones, felt the corner of his mouth pull up. I couldn't see it. But I could feel it. And honestly, it felt exactly like it should. Ron's grin was wide and immediate and real. Good. This is not funny, Hermione said, turning from the window. This is, Harry, the political implications alone, the Wizengamot, the ministry, the entire structure of magical governance, this is, she stopped. Took a breath. This is enormous. I know, Harry said. The Sovereignty Protocol supersedes the Ministry Charter, she said, and her voice had shifted from alarm to the tone she used when she was actively thinking rather than reacting, focused, rapid, building. Which means you have a legal authority that doesn't require Fudge's sign-off or the Wizengamot's vote. You can act unilaterally in ways that, another stop. How much of the protocol did Ragnarok explain? Enough to work from. I'm going to need you to research the rest, Harry said. Everything you can find on the Sovereignty Protocol, Merlin's original framing of it, the 1612 precedent, and what the legal scope of sovereign authority actually covers. I need to know exactly what I can do before I start doing it. Hogwarts library has very little on it, Hermione said immediately. It would have been in the restricted section or removed entirely. Gringotts will have records. Private family libraries of the older houses might, she paused. We'd need access to those. I own 11 properties, Harry said. One of which is a manor with a library that's been accumulating magical texts since the Plantagenets. We can start there. Sovereign's Rest, Hermione said. I want to go today, Harry said. Before Selwyn's people have time to cause problems with the eviction. Ron picked up his wand from the table. I'm in. Obviously I'm in, Hermione said, with a tone suggesting the question had been slightly insulting. She pulled out a small notebook from her bag and began writing very quickly. We'll need food, I'll need my research materials, I think we should send a letter to Professor Lupin before we go so he knows we're safe. The Order will have noticed Harry left Privet Drive, already on it, Harry said. He had drafted the letter to Lupin on the back of a Gringotts receipt while waiting for them. He slid it across the table. Hermione read it, made a very small sound of something between exasperation and reluctant approval, and said, You've been planning this since you got in the room. I've been planning it since Florian Fortescue's, Harry said. I had ice cream. Ron stood up, tucking his wand away. Right then. He looked at Harry, not with awe, not with the dazed quality that Harry had half expected, but with the steady, uncomplicated certainty that was the most fundamental thing about Ron Weasley. Still you, though. Yeah. Still me, Harry said. Just, more of me than there was yesterday. Ron nodded. That's fine, he said simply. About time, honestly. They went back downstairs through the east annex and into the afternoon sun of Diagon Alley, and Harry walked between his two best friends past the shops and the people and the turning newspaper stand with the ministry headline he hadn't bothered to read, and the power that lived in him now was warm and steady and patient. In Wiltshire, in a manor house that had been occupied by people without the right to it for 18 years, the wards shivered and reoriented, recognizing the approach of someone they had been waiting a very long time for. In 12 locations across Britain, pureblood lords were making fluke calls to each other, speaking in low, urgent voices about what had happened to their knees that morning and what it meant and who could possibly have triggered it, and in Malfoy Manor specifically, Lucius Malfoy stood at his drawing-room window with a glass of Ogden's old fire whiskey and looked north toward London and said nothing at all. In Gringotts, Director Ragnarok was drafting a document in Goblin script that would, when completed, be the first full legal recognition of Goblin personhood by any magical authority in 300 years, and he worked with the careful, unhurried precision of a man who finally had the right pen for a letter he had been composing his whole life. And in a room above the east annex of Gringotts Bank, a privacy ward shimmered and then dissolved, because the people it had been protecting were gone. The world had not yet caught up. It would. The world always did, eventually. But for a few more hours, the Sovereign of Magic was just a 16-year-old boy walking through Diagon Alley in the July sunshine with his best friends, thinking about a library he had never visited and a manor that was finally, irrevocably, his. Chapter 2, The World Kneels Badly. Sovereign's Rest didn't look like a manor that had been squatted in for 18 years. It looked like a manor that had been performing occupancy, the lawns trimmed, the hedgerows neat, the stone facade freshly pointed, while quietly resenting every moment of it. The Potter wards, Harry realized the instant he stepped through the iron gate at the end of the gravel drive, had been tolerating the Selwyns the way a river tolerates a dam, patiently, and with absolute certainty about who would win eventually. The gate opened without Harry touching it. That's not subtle, Ron said. No, Harry agreed. The manor itself was older than Hogwarts in some of its bones. You could see it in the way the stone had been laid, the proportions that predated the standardization of wizarding architecture in the 16th century. 3 stories, wings that extended at comfortable angles rather than the aggressive symmetry of newer construction, windows that caught the late afternoon light and held it in a way that suggested the glass had been made rather than manufactured. It was not the largest building Harry had ever seen, but it had the quality of things built to last rather than impress, and the difference was legible in every line of it. The front door opened before they reached the steps. Not swung open dramatically. Just opened, measured and certain, the way doors open for people who belong behind them. Standing in the doorway was a man Harry had never met, in his mid-50s, with the kind of silver-threaded hair that spoke of good breeding maintained carefully, wearing formal robes at 3 in the afternoon in a way that suggested this was his baseline. His expression was working very hard to project authority and composure while somewhere behind his eyes something that looked like controlled panic was doing calculations at speed. This was, Harry concluded, a Selwyn. I received notice from Gringotts, the man said. His voice was clipped and deliberate. I want you to know that my family's claim to this property is, there is no claim, Harry said. He stopped at the base of the steps and looked up at the man without particular hostility and without any give whatsoever. There was never a claim. There was an occupancy of an unguarded property belonging to a minor. The minor is 16 today, the property is claimed, and the notice from Gringotts was a courtesy. You have until sunrise tomorrow. I have been in this house for 18 years, the man said, with the particular edge of someone who has confused duration with legitimacy. My children were born in this house. The magical infrastructure of this estate has been maintained by my family's investment. Gringotts will calculate what you spent on maintenance and deduct it from the back rent you owe me, Harry said. That's the most generous interpretation of your situation. The other interpretation is that you're a trespasser and I ask Gringotts to pursue the full outstanding claim, which 18 years of unauthorized use of Potter family magical resources works out to. He looked at Hermione. Approximately 62,000 galleons, Hermione said, without missing a beat, because she had been doing the arithmetic since they left Diagon Alley and had a small notebook to prove it. The man went slightly gray. I'm not interested in ruining your family, Harry said. But I am interested in my house. Sunrise tomorrow. Take everything that's yours and leave everything that was here before you arrived. He paused. The library. Don't touch anything in the library. He walked up the steps. The man stepped back, not gracefully, but he stepped back, and Harry walked through his own front door for the first time, with Ron and Hermione behind him, and the Potter ward settled around his shoulders like a coat that had been waiting on a hook since 1981. The entrance hall was larger than it looked from outside, flagged in pale stone with a vaulted ceiling and a staircase that curved up the left wall with the kind of easy elegance that good joiners had understood before architects started overcomplicating everything. There were portraits on the walls, Potters, generations of them, looking down at Harry with expressions ranging from dignified pleasure to outright delight. A woman in a portrait near the landing, painted in the style of the early 1700s with dark hair and green eyes that were immediately familiar, said, finally, with a feeling that compressed several decades' worth of waiting into a single syllable. Harry looked up at her. I'll come back and talk to you properly, he said. I need the library first. Second floor, east wing, she said immediately. Your great-great-grandmother Arctia expanded it in 1887. Mind the third shelf from the left, it bites. Thanks, Harry said, and kept moving. The library was everything the Hogwarts library was not, which was to say it was personal. The Hogwarts library was institutional, organized for access and broad use, the kind of space built to serve a population of hundreds. This was a private collection assembled over centuries by people with specific interests and enough money and magic to pursue them, and it showed in the gaps and concentrations, the way certain subjects had 4 shelves while others had 12. It also showed in the section that had clearly been avoided by the Selwyns, a set of shelves in the corner behind an oak reading table, warded with something that glowed amber when Harry stepped close to it. The ward recognized him the same way the gate and the door had, and dissolved with a sound like pages turning in a long-closed book. Oh, Hermione said, from beside him, staring at the shelves. Then she said it again, differently, oh. Good O or complicated O? Ron asked. Both, she said, already reaching for the nearest volume. Harry, there are texts here that the British Museum thinks were lost. This is a first edition Codex Arcanum, that's a handwritten treatise by Bridget Wenlock, and this, she stopped, holding a slim volume bound in material that was neither leather nor cloth and glowed very faintly at its edges. "This is a copy of Merlin's original framing of the Sovereignty Protocol." "That," Harry said, "is the one I need." Hermione held it with both hands and sat down at the reading table and opened it with the kind of focused reverence she reserved for things that genuinely mattered. Harry sat across from her. Ron pulled up a chair between them, leaned back, and produced an apple from his pocket with the air of someone prepared to be supportive for as long as it took. Harry didn't read over Hermione's shoulder. He let her read, let her process, let her do what she did best. Instead he looked around the library and thought about everything he hadn't yet done and needed to do. The Dumbledore problem was sitting at the edge of his thinking like a splinter, not the kind that was immediately agonizing but the kind that you became increasingly aware of with every movement. He had 12 seals documented, dated, signed in Dumbledore's precise magical signature. He had evidence that Dumbledore had been actively shaping Harry's development, limiting it, since before Harry could walk. The question was not whether it had happened. The question was what Harry did about it, and in what order, and what he needed Dumbledore for before he addressed it directly. He still needed Voldemort dealt with. That hadn't changed. The prophecy hadn't changed. The fact that Harry now had access to his full magical capability and the authority of an ancient sovereignty didn't unmake the connection between him and Voldemort or the fact that one of them was going to have to end it. Dumbledore had 70 years of knowledge about Voldemort that Harry needed. Burning that bridge before he'd crossed it would be satisfying and stupid in equal measure. So. Not yet. But soon, and honestly, and on Harry's terms. He became aware that Hermione had stopped reading and was looking at him. "The scope of sovereign authority under Merlin's original framework," she said, and her voice had that particular quality it got when she was about to deliver information she had already organized into categories, "is considerably broader than I expected. The protocol wasn't designed as a temporary measure. Merlin wrote it as a constitutional foundation, a bedrock authority that the Wisengamot and Ministry derive their legitimacy from, not the other way around. The sovereign has the authority to dissolve, reform, or restructure any magical governing body in Britain. To grant or revoke citizenship, title, or magical status. To create binding law by decree, though Merlin specifically noted that a just sovereign would prefer consensus to decree wherever possible." "He said that?" Harry said. "He wrote, power wielded alone grows inward and becomes a wound. Power wielded in council grows outward and becomes a nation." She looked up. He wasn't wrong. "No," Harry agreed. "There are limits," she continued. "The sovereign cannot override individual magical will, you can compel institutions but not persons. You cannot strip a witch or wizard of their innate magic. And the sovereignty is not hereditary in the traditional sense, it reverts on the sovereign's death unless a new sovereign is identified by the protocol, which operates independently. So I can't just pass it to my kids," Harry said. "No." Which Merlin apparently considered a feature. Ron had eaten his apple and was now leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "What about the Death Eaters? The ones walking around free because Fudge's ministry is too busy being useless?" "That's ministry authority," Hermione said. "Harry can't directly compel the minister, I can compel the Wisengamot," Harry said. "The ministry derives its authority from the Wisengamot's charter. The Wisengamot's charter derives its authority from the Sovereignty Protocol. The chain of command is clear." Hermione stared at him. "You worked that out at Florian Fortescue's." "I worked out the shape of it. You just confirmed the details." Harry looked at her. "I need to address the Wisengamot. Formally. Within the next few days, before the shock of this morning wears off and people start organizing resistance. When they're still processing it is when we establish what the new structure actually looks like." "You can't just walk into the Wisengamot," Hermione said. "I'm the sovereign of magic," Harry said mildly. "I think I can walk wherever I'd like. I mean tactically. Strategically. You walk in there cold, with no prep, against people who have spent their entire careers navigating that chamber, and even with the authority of the protocol behind you, they'll use procedure and precedent to slow you down, confuse the issue, buy time for Lucius Malfoy to. You're right, Harry said. So we prep. He looked between them. 3 demands. Simple, specific, immediately actionable. We walk in with 3 things we want agreed before we leave that chamber, and we don't leave until we have them. What 3? Ron asked. Serious, Harry said immediately. Full pardon, formal exoneration, compensation for wrongful imprisonment. That one is unambiguous. He never had a trial, that's documented, it's not a matter of interpretation. Anyone who votes against it is voting for wrongful imprisonment of an innocent man and can explain that to their constituents. Second. Hermione said. She had her notebook out. Umbridge. Removal from the educational system and formal investigation into her actions as High Inquisitor. What she did at Hogwarts last year was torture. I have the scars to prove it. Harry kept his voice level. That one has public appeal, parents with students at Hogwarts will back it. It isolates Fudge without directly attacking him, yet. And the third? Ron asked. An emergency audit of all Wizengamot seats held by members with documented or suspected Death Eater connections, Harry said. Not removal, not yet. Just audit. Disclosure. Who holds what seat and on what basis? That's all. Hermione had stopped writing and was looking at him with an expression he recognized, the one she got when she was recalibrating. That third one will terrify them, she said. Half the old guard have Death Eater connections in their family histories going back to either Voldemort's rise or Grindelwald or both. Good, Harry said. Terrified people move faster. You're going to need to appear at the Wizengamot in official capacity, she said, switching modes, thinking practically now. The Sovereignty Protocol will have a formal designation for that, I'll find it. You'll need the appropriate acknowledgement of your status, Ragnarok can document it, Harry said. Gringotts is the oldest standing financial and legal institution in British magical society. Their attestation of the sovereignty identification will carry more legal weight than anything the Ministry could produce. Smart, Ron said. Ministry can't argue with Gringotts. Nobody argues with Gringotts, Harry said. He looked around the library one more time, at the shelves that held centuries of Potter and Peverell knowledge, and made a decision. We stay here tonight. All 3 of us. Send word to your families, tell them you're safe and with Harry and you'll explain later. My mum will have questions, Ron said. Your mum will have a lot of questions, Harry agreed. Tell her I said it's important. She'll want to come, Ron said. She's welcome, Harry said. After Tuesday. Ron blinked. You've already got a date. I want this done before the weekend, Harry said. Before anyone has time to coordinate properly against it. The Selwyn man had not reappeared. Harry suspected he was in the East Wing having a quiet family crisis, which was fair enough. He sent an elf, or rather, the manor sent an elf, a small ancient creature named Thistlewick who appeared from behind a bookcase and introduced himself as the manor's household keeper and had been waiting since 1981 and did Mr. Potter require tea, to let the Selwyns know that Harry was in the library and they could have the rest of the house to pack without interruption. Thistlewick produced tea and an extraordinary amount of food for 3 people, laid it on the reading table between the books without disturbing anything, and then vanished as efficiently as he had appeared. I need to write to Lupin, Harry said. And I need to think about when to talk to Dumbledore. He'll come to you, Hermione said quietly. When he finds out you've left Privet Drive and claimed Sovereign's Rest. He'll come to you. I know, Harry said. Let him. They worked until midnight, Hermione cross-referencing the protocol document against 3 other texts she found on the same shelves, building what she called a legal architecture for Harry's presentation to the Wizengamot and what Ron called the world's most complicated argument that Harry should be in charge. The distinction between the 2 descriptions was, Harry thought, thinner than Hermione would admit. Dumbledore arrived at 9 the next morning. Harry had known he was coming since 8:30, when the manor's perimeter wards, deeper and more sophisticated than Harry had expected, possibly because the Selwyns had maintained the physical wards while having no idea how to access the sovereignty key detection systems, registered an approach from the northwest with a magical signature Harry would have recognized anywhere. He was sitting in the kitchen drinking tea when Thistlewick announced that a visitor was at the gate, and Harry said to let him in, and 3 minutes later Albus Dumbledore was standing in the kitchen doorway of Sovereign's Rest with his half-moon glasses and his silver beard and his robes the color of deep water and an expression of such careful, calibrated gentleness that Harry looked at it and felt, with sudden clarity, exactly how much of his life that expression had been managing him. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor," Harry said. "Do you want tea?" Dumbledore came in and sat down across from Harry at the kitchen table, which was an old farmhouse style, scrubbed pine, aggressively unpretentious given the house it was in, and which suited the conversation Harry intended to have perfectly. Harry poured him tea without being asked and pushed the milk across. "I imagine you have questions," Dumbledore said. "I have answers," Harry said. Gringotts was thorough. He kept his voice even. 12 seals, Albus. Placed on me at 15 months old and maintained without my knowledge or consent for 15 years. My magical core locked to 40%. My Parselmouth ability suppressed. My connection to 11 properties severed. My inheritance withheld. Dumbledore did not deflect or perform surprise. Harry appreciated that, in a complicated way. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Why?" "Because I was afraid," Dumbledore said. "For many of the reasons you've likely already considered. The connection between you and Voldemort, I believed, and still believe, that it would have transmitted your full magical development to him in ways that would have made him significantly more dangerous. I believed the seals were protection. I believed I was making a decision that would ultimately save more lives than it cost." He paused. "I also believed you would be safer if you did not know what you were. A 16-year-old boy in possession of the full scale of his inheritance and the knowledge of his status as sovereign of magic is a very visible target." "I was a visible target anyway," Harry said. "I was a visible target from the moment Voldemort tried to kill me and couldn't. The seals didn't make me less of a target. They just made me less equipped to deal with it." Dumbledore was quiet. "Cedric Diggory died in that graveyard," Harry said. His voice didn't rise. "Sirius is dead. I spent a year being tortured by a ministry-appointed sadist in a school that you were removed from, and you let that happen rather than," he stopped. Breathed. "You made 17 years of decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent, and you did it because you thought you knew better. I understand the reasoning. I even understand some of it was genuine care. But it was wrong, and I need you to acknowledge that clearly, not as part of an explanation." Dumbledore looked at him. In the morning light of the kitchen, he looked genuinely old, not in the way of most people his age, not general decline, but the specific age of someone who has made mistakes they cannot unmake and has been living with that awareness for a long time. "You're right," Dumbledore said. Plainly. Without architecture around it. "What I did was wrong. It was arrogant and controlling and it cost you things you cannot get back. I am sorry, Harry. That is not sufficient. I know it's not sufficient. But it's true." Harry looked at him for a moment, taking the measure of it. It was real. Dumbledore's apologies weren't always real, sometimes they were tactical performances. This one was real, and Harry knew the difference, which was perhaps one of the less comfortable things his years with Dumbledore had taught him. "All right," Harry said. "Then let's talk about where we go from here, because I need your help and I'm going to need you to let me be in charge of my own life while I have it." Something in Dumbledore's expression shifted, relief, genuine and unperformed. "Yes," he said. "Tell me what you're planning." Harry told him about the Wizengamot presentation. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which was itself a kind of statement. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, turning his teacup in his fingers. Cornelius will resist, he said finally. Cornelius can resist all he likes from outside the chamber, Harry said. The sovereignty protocol supersedes the minister's authority. He can't actually stop it. He can be difficult and political and create noise, but he can't stop it. The resistance from the old families will be significant. It's already significant. The question is whether it's organized or panicked, and I'd rather face panicked. Harry leaned forward slightly. I need you in that room. Not directing things, I need you present as a witness and as someone the old guard has to reckon with before they decide to stonewall. You're still the most powerful wizard in Britain in their estimation. In their estimation, Dumbledore repeated, and something in his tone suggested he found that particular distinction worth noting. Until they've seen what I can do, Harry said simply. After Tuesday, the calculation will be different. Dumbledore nodded slowly. I'll be there. And Sirius, Harry said. I need him healthy enough to be present when his exoneration is formalized. Whatever resources are needed to get him there, Sirius received your message through Gringotts at 2 this morning, Dumbledore said. He cried, I believe, for approximately an hour. He will be wherever you need him. Harry absorbed that. Something in his chest tightened and then loosened, and he picked up his tea and didn't say anything about it, which Dumbledore had the good grace not to comment on either. One more thing, Harry said. Peter Pettigrew. He's alive, he's with Voldemort, and he is the only witness to Sirius's innocence who is also alive and accessible in theory. I need him. Not dead. Alive and in ministry custody, because a live Pettigrew makes Sirius's exoneration bulletproof and a dead one makes it a matter of taking Harry Potter's word for it, which I'd rather not rely on. Dumbledore looked at him with an expression Harry recognized, genuine respect, the kind that acknowledges when someone has thought more clearly than expected. I have some thoughts on that, he said carefully. So do I, Harry said. We'll compare notes. Tuesday morning arrived cold and clear, which Harry thought was appropriate, the kind of weather that made everything feel significant whether it was or not. He wore the formal robes Thistlewick had produced from a cedar chest in the master suite, robes in deep charcoal with silver stitching at the collar and cuffs that were both clearly old and clearly made for someone with Harry's exact measurements, which he suspected meant they had been made with a growing charm for the heir who would eventually need them. He wore the sovereign's crest on a ring on his right hand, a plain band of dark metal, neither gold nor silver, that had appeared in the ritual basin at Gringotts and been delivered to Sovereign's Rest by Sharpclaw personally on Monday evening, along with a formal attestation document from Ragnarok certifying the results of the comprehensive inheritance audit and the activation of the sovereignty protocol. Hermione had the attestation document in a warded case. Ron had Harry's back, which was what Ron had always had, and which was not nothing. The Wisingamot met in a chamber beneath the ministry that Harry knew from 2 previous visits, neither of which had been pleasant. It was tiered and circular, built for observation, with the ancient seats of the member families arranged in ascending rows. The center floor was where witnesses and defendants stood. Harry had stood there once as a defendant. He had a particular feeling about standing there today that was almost symmetrical. The emergency session had been called by Amelia Bones, head of magical law enforcement, who had sent a terse 1-paragraph notice to every Wisingamot member citing matters of constitutional magnitude requiring immediate full membership attendance. The Bones family was not in the sacred 28, they had been excluded in the political reshuffling of the 1700s for reasons that Harry suspected had more to do with their persistent inconvenient honesty than anything else. Amelia Bones was a broad, square-shouldered woman in her 50s with a monocle she did not actually need for vision but wore with the air of someone using it to peer at things and find them wanting. She had received a private communication from Gringotts on Monday that had made her call the emergency session in the first place. Harry didn't enter from the defendant's entrance. He walked in through the main chamber doors at the top of the gallery, which required a passkey that was keyed to Wisingamot members, which Ragnarok had quietly included in the package delivered by Sharpclaw on Monday evening, noting in the covering letter that the sovereignty protocol included automatic membership in all governing bodies the sovereign's authority superseded, as Hermione had already confirmed. He walked down through the tiered seating with Ron and Hermione behind him. The chamber was filling, members arriving in ones and twos, taking their seats, looking at each other with the suppressed energy of people who know something large is about to happen and have been speculating about it since the emergency notice arrived. The murmur of conversation was dense and layered, and it stopped, or rather stuttered, as Harry came down through the tiers. He recognized faces. Lucius Malfoy, in his family's traditional seat, in robes so precisely pressed they looked architectural. He was watching Harry's approach with an expression of absolute control and absolute calculation, not the contempt Harry was used to from Malfoy, but something more carefully managed. Wariness dressed as indifference. Their eyes met, and Harry held the contact for exactly 1 second before looking away, which was, he had decided, the appropriate amount. Minister Fudge was in the ministerial box, elevated, set apart, with 2 aides flanking him. He looked, Harry thought, like a man who had been told the ground was about to shift and had decided to respond to this information by standing very still and hoping it wouldn't. Dolores Umbridge was seated 3 rows up from the floor, in cherry-pink robes that looked obscene in the grey severity of the Wizengamot chamber. She saw Harry and her face did something complicated and ultimately settled on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Harry looked at her and felt nothing at all, which was more frightening than anger would have been. He walked to the center of the chamber floor and stood there, and the chamber went quiet. Not gradually. Quickly, in the way that happens when enough people in a room simultaneously decide to pay attention. Amelia Bones stood at the presiding seat. This emergency session of the Wizengamot has been called in response to a communication received from Gringotts Bank attesting to an event of constitutional significance, she said, in the voice of someone who had been running formal proceedings for 20 years and was very good at it. Before we proceed, I will ask the individual in question to identify himself for the record. Harry James Potter, Harry said. His voice carried easily in the stone chamber. Son of James Charles Potter and Lily Euphemia Potter née Evans. Heir to the most ancient and noble house of Potter. Heir to the Peveril legacy. Identified sovereign of magic under the Merlin Sovereignty Protocol, attested by Ragnarok, director of Gringotts Bank, on the 16th day of July, 1996. He looked around the chamber as he said it, not performing it, not making theater of it, just saying it the way you state something true. The chamber erupted. Not in applause or alarm, but in the specific cacophony of 80 witches and wizards who are all trying to say different things at the same time and are all very practiced at being loud. Harry waited. He stood in the center of the floor and waited, and after approximately 90 seconds the noise peaked and began to settle because there was nothing in his posture that suggested he was going anywhere. Amelia Bones gavelled the chamber to order with the forceful practicality of a woman who had gavelled harder things. The Wizengamot will come to order. I have reviewed the Gringotts attestation and found it procedurally valid. The protocol is legally documented. The question before this body is not whether this identification is genuine, that is settled. The question is how this body responds to it. I'd like to address that, Lucius Malfoy said, and his voice was smooth as polished stone. Before this chamber accepts the premise that a 16-year-old boy with no political training and no understanding of our governance structure has been granted supreme authority over every institution in British magical society, I think we are entitled to examine the activation conditions of the protocol. The sovereignty identifies in cases where governance has become, he produced a document, clearly prepared, clearly researched, so corrupt, so unjust, or so disconnected from the fundamental nature of magic itself that it threatens the survival of the magical community. I put it to this chamber that characterizing our current governance as such is an extraordinary insult, Lord Malfoy, Harry said. Malfoy paused. You were on your knees last Sunday morning, Harry said. Quiet. Conversational. Not because I asked you to be. Because the oldest magic in Britain looked at the current state of its governing structures and made a determination. I didn't trigger that. I didn't choose it. The protocol chose it because the protocol was designed to be accurate. He looked around the chamber. I'm not here to insult anyone. I'm here because the magic that underpins this entire society has said something needs to change, and I have 3 specific proposals for where we start. The chamber shifted. Malfoy sat down, not because he agreed with Harry, but because the moment for that particular argument had passed and he was intelligent enough to know it. Harry presented the 3 demands simply and directly, without embellishment. Sirius Black's exoneration. The removal and investigation of Dolores Umbridge. The emergency audit of all seats with Death Eater connections. The silence after the 3rd demand was the loudest silence Harry had heard since the graveyard. Umbridge's face was no longer smiling. It had gone very still and very white, which Harry found considerably more honest. The first matter, Amelia Bones said, and her voice had acquired a quality, dry satisfaction very carefully contained, is Sirius Orion Black, imprisoned in 1981 without trial. I have reviewed the arrest records. The absence of trial documentation is confirmed. Under existing law, the absence of trial renders the imprisonment void. The only obstacle to exoneration has been ministerial reluctance to process the correction. She looked, very briefly, at Fudge. That obstacle has been removed by the current proceedings. I move for immediate exoneration of Sirius Orion Black. All in favor? It wasn't unanimous. But the hands against were few enough, and the hands for were many enough, and the count was never in doubt. Harry heard a sound from the gallery behind him and turned. Sirius was in the upper tier. He'd come in quietly. Harry hadn't seen him arrive, thinner than Harry remembered and with the particular translucence of someone who had recently been very ill and was still getting better, in clean robes, standing very straight, and when the count came in his eyes were wet and his face was, Harry didn't look away from it. He held his godfather's gaze and nodded, once, and Sirius pressed his lips together and nodded back. The second matter, Umbridge, went faster than Harry expected, largely because Amelia Bones had been trying to investigate Umbridge for 18 months and the sovereignty proceedings had stripped away the ministerial protection that had been blocking it. The vote for removal and investigation passed so heavily that even Umbridge, who was not unintelligent, did not bother to argue. She left the chamber under escort. She did not look at Harry as she went. He did not look at her. The 3rd demand was where Lucius Malfoy made his real move. An audit of this nature, he said, rising with the careful precision of someone who has had this argument prepared since the emergency notice arrived, would constitute a de facto accusation against every member of this body with family connections to the events of the past 2 decades. I move that the proposed audit be referred to committee. I'd like to know, Harry said, cutting across him pleasantly, why the prospect of transparency in seat ownership is frightening to anyone in this room. If your family's seat was legitimately acquired and has been legitimately held, an audit is simply paperwork. He let a pause settle. Unless it isn't. Malfoy's expression didn't change. The eyes did. What you're describing, he said, is an attack on the oldest families in Britain. I'm describing a list, Harry said. A list of who holds what seat and how they got it. That's all. The list either confirms that everything is in order, or it reveals that it isn't. He looked around the chamber. If it confirms things are in order, Lord Malfoy should have nothing to worry about. I'd ask the chamber to consider why the motion to refer to committee was made by the person who seems most concerned about what the list might say. The chamber considered it. Harry could see the calculation happening in real time in the faces of the members, the ones who were genuinely clean and could see the logic, the ones who had something to hide and were afraid, and the ones in the middle who were making a political decision about which way to land. The vote for the audit passed by 11. It wasn't a huge margin. But it passed, which was what mattered. Lucius Malfoy was looking at Harry as the vote count was announced, and Harry looked back, and what passed between them was not personal exactly, it was strategic, the acknowledgement between 2 people who both understand that they are at war and that this has been the opening engagement. Malfoy was thinking ahead. Harry could see it in the way his attention was not on the chamber but slightly past it, working on something. Somewhere behind the controlled expression and the precise robes, Lucius Malfoy's mind was moving very fast. Harry filed that away. After the session, in the corridor outside the chamber while the ministry buzzed and hummed with the aftershock of the last 2 hours, Amelia Bones found Harry before anyone else did. She was direct in the way of people who don't have patience for the alternative. "That was well done," she said. "Thank you," Harry said. "The audit will have results within 6 weeks," she said. "Some of those results will be significant. I want you to know, sovereign or not, that magical law enforcement will act on them properly, through proper procedure, and that I am not in the habit of allowing political pressure to override that process." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I presented it the way I did. You don't need me to run the investigation. You just needed the politics moved out of your way." She looked at him for a moment, the monocle turned toward him, which up close was, Harry decided, genuinely slightly intimidating. Then she said, "Your mother was in the magical law enforcement consideration process before she went back to Hogwarts for her 7th year. Did you know that?" "I didn't," Harry said. "She was extraordinarily talented," Bones said simply. "Good day, Mr. Potter." She walked away with the purposeful stride of someone who had a great deal to do and was glad to finally be able to do it. Sirius appeared at Harry's elbow approximately 30 seconds later, having navigated the corridor with the particular focus of a man who had just had his life given back to him and was in a slight daze about it. He grabbed Harry's shoulder and Harry turned and they looked at each other, and Harry thought words were not really the appropriate technology for this particular moment. "You absolute menace," Sirius said, with a voice that was rough at the edges. "You absolute, happy birthday to me," Harry said. Sirius laughed, which broke into something not quite crying and not quite laughing and was entirely both, and then he pulled Harry into a hug that was fierce and brief and communicated 17 years of wanting without being able to, and Harry stood in the ministry corridor in his formal sovereign's robes and held on to his godfather and thought, this was always going to be the first thing. From 50 meters away, in the shadow of a corridor junction, Lucius Malfoy watched Harry Potter embrace the newly exonerated Sirius Black, and his jaw was set and his eyes were cold and his mind was working. He was already 2 steps ahead of today. The question was whether Harry Potter would be 3. Chapter 3, Old Houses, New Rules. The library at Sovereign's Rest had a rhythm to it at night. The torches dimmed themselves without being asked, the portraits quieted, and the house settled into a kind of alert stillness that was nothing like the dead silence of Privet Drive. It was the stillness of something that was paying attention rather than something that had stopped. Harry had been sleeping better in 4 days here than he had in 16 years on Privet Drive, which told him something about what home actually meant. He was reading at the library table at 7 in the morning when Draco Malfoy walked through the front door. Not knocked. Walked through, because the wards had recognized him at the perimeter and Harry had told Thistlewick the previous evening that if anyone came to the gate claiming to need to speak with him privately, let them through and send them to the library. He had been expecting Lucius. The fact that it was Draco instead was interesting enough that Harry simply set down his book and waited. Draco looked different outside of Hogwarts. Harry had only ever seen him in school robes or Malfoy Manor's formal context, the drawn-up posture, the practiced sneer, the social armor polished to a high shine. Standing in the library doorway in plain traveling clothes, without an audience, he looked younger than Harry had expected, which was strange given that they were the same age. He also looked like he hadn't slept. "Sit down," Harry said. "I didn't come here to take orders," Draco said. "Then stand," Harry said. "I don't mind either way." Draco stood for a moment, apparently on principle, and then sat down across the table from Harry. He looked at the books, at the room, at the crest ring on Harry's right hand, and then at Harry's face with an expression that was working hard to be hostile and wasn't quite managing it. "My father doesn't know I'm here," he said. "I assumed," Harry said. "He'd consider it a strategic error, probably," Harry said. "Or a betrayal, depending on his mood." Something moved across Draco's face. "Don't," he said, quietly. "All right." Harry folded his hands on the table. "What do you want, Draco?" The use of his given name seemed to catch him slightly off guard. They had never been on first-name terms at school, the Malfoy-Potter dynamic having been conducted entirely in surnames with escalating levels of venom attached. Draco absorbed it, processed it, and then said, as if testing the feel of it, "I want to understand what happened last Sunday morning." "The sovereignty protocol activated," Harry said. "I know that. My father explained the broad concept." Draco's jaw tightened fractionally. "I want to understand why it put every pureblood lord in Britain on their knees. Specifically. Mechanically. Because my father explained it as an ancient formality, a magical reflex with no real bearing on the present. Your father is managing his panic by reclassifying what happened," Harry said. "The compulsion was real. The protocol is real. It isn't a formality, it's a constitutional foundation that predates every other governing structure in British magical society. The sovereignty supersedes the ministry, the Wisengamot, the charters of every noble house. That's what it is." Draco was quiet. "The reason the compulsion applied specifically to the Lords of the Sacred 28, Harry continued, because Draco had come here with a real question and deserved a real answer, is that those families hold their standing through magical Britain's governance structures, and those structures are themselves subordinate to the sovereignty. When the protocol identified me, the hierarchical acknowledgement propagated automatically through every formal seat of magical authority in the country. It wasn't targeted at your father personally. It was a system running its own code." Draco stared at him. "You've gotten considerably smarter than you used to be." "I've had access to my full intelligence for about 5 days," Harry said. "My magical core was sealed for 15 years. By whom?" "Dumbledore." A pause. "Dumbledore." "Yes." Draco sat back slightly. "My father says Dumbledore is the single greatest obstacle to proper magical governance that Britain has produced in 2 centuries. "Your father says that," Harry said, "for completely wrong reasons, that happen to be pointing at a real problem. Dumbledore has been operating as an unchecked power center in this country for 30 years. He did it because he genuinely believes he's right, and he usually is right about more things than he's wrong about, but the oversight was absent and the damage was real. That's the problem with unchecked power. Even when the person holding it has good intentions." Draco was watching him with an expression that had stopped trying to be hostile and had settled into something more honest, calculation, but the genuine kind, the kind where someone is actually taking in information and deciding what to do with it rather than performing skepticism. "You're going to restructure everything," Draco said. "Not everything," Harry said. "The things that need restructuring. Which includes the political standing of the old families. Which includes the political standing that was built on blood status as a legal category," Harry said. "Yes. That has to go." Draco looked at the table. His jaw was set, not with anger exactly, but with the tension of someone confronting a truth they'd been circling for a while without being able to approach directly. "If blood status is removed as a legal category," he said, carefully, "then the basis for my family's standing in the Wisengamot is, still entirely valid," Harry said. "The Malfoy family has held a Wisengamot seat since 1342. That seat was established before blood status was codified as a legal category, which only happened in 1709. If the seat's claim is legitimate on its own terms, land ownership, magical contribution to the community, historical standing, it survives the reform. If the only thing holding it up is the blood status classification, then it needed auditing anyway." Draco absorbed this. "You've thought about this in detail." "Hermione has thought about this in detail," Harry said. "I've thought about the outline. The distinction matters, she's better at detail than I am and I know it." "Granger," Draco said, and there was a complicated history in a single word. "Granger," Harry confirmed. "If you want to be offensive about it, do it quietly, because she is sitting in the East Wing right now probably already knowing more about your family's legal standing than you do, and you might want her on your side." Draco looked like he'd bitten into something sour. "I'm not here to," he stopped. Started again. "I'm not here to negotiate or align or make any kind of political gesture. I came because I want to understand what's happening before my father, before decisions are made on my behalf that I had no part in. Harry looked at him steadily. What did your father say about Sunday morning? Exactly. Draco hesitated. I'm not asking so I can use it against him, Harry said. I'm asking because knowing what he thinks he's dealing with tells me something about what he's planning. Another hesitation, shorter. He said it was a temporary elevation. That the protocol had been misidentified, or misapplied, or could be challenged through counter-precedent. He said there were options. Draco met Harry's eyes. He had people at the house that night. People I didn't know. They were there until 2 in the morning. Harry kept his expression neutral. Do you know who they were? No. But they weren't social guests. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it. Draco stood up, apparently having reached whatever interior decision had been his actual objective. The expression on his face was still complex, still working through something, but it had a clarity to it that hadn't been there when he arrived. I'm not your ally, he said. I want to be clear about that. Noted, Harry said. But I'm not, I don't want to be what my father is making me into, he said, and it came out more directly than Harry suspected he intended, and for a moment something raw was visible in it before Draco's composure reassembled. Whatever that means. Harry looked at him. It probably means you have to figure out what you actually think rather than what you were told to think, he said. Which is uncomfortable. I know, because I had to do it too, and people I trusted were the ones who had been doing the telling. Draco looked at him for a long moment. Then he walked out without another word. Harry sat for a moment after he left, turning the conversation over. The detail about the late-night guests at Malfoy Manor was the most important thing, more important than anything else Draco had said, and Harry doubted that Draco had been entirely aware of how significant it was. Lucius was moving faster than Harry had expected. The Wisengamot session had been 3 days ago. The seat audit was underway. The Death Eater vault freezes were in effect. Lucius Malfoy was feeling the walls of his carefully constructed world pressing inward, and men like Lucius in that situation did not retreat. They looked for leverage. Harry was already reaching for parchment when Hermione appeared in the library doorway, hair still slightly disordered from the morning, with a cup of tea in each hand and an expression that said she had heard at least part of the conversation. Draco Malfoy just walked out of your house, she said. He came to ask questions, Harry said. Legitimate ones. And the not legitimate reason he came? To find out how worried his father should be, Harry said. Which I answered honestly. Hermione set a cup in front of him and sat down with her own. You know Lucius is going to consider that a provocation. Lucius Malfoy considers breathing a provocation, Harry said. Draco told me something useful. Lucius had unidentified guests at the manor Sunday night. Research meeting. Something to do with the protocol. He picked up his quill. I need to know everything there is to know about counterrights to the sovereignty protocol. Specifically whether any exist, and specifically what they require. Hermione's expression sharpened. If there is a counterright, Merlin would have known someone would look for one, Harry said. He wasn't naive. So either he closed the loophole, or he left it open deliberately and the conditions are designed to make it self-defeating. Give me an hour, Hermione said, already standing. You have 40 minutes, Harry said. We have Sirius arriving at 10 and I want to discuss the Wisengamot seat audit with him before Bones sends the preliminary findings. 40 minutes is fine, she said, over her shoulder, already moving toward the shelves. Sirius arrived at 10 past 10, which was almost punctual by his standards. He came by Fleur directly into the manor's main parlor. Harry had added his name to the Fleur network access list the day after the Wisengamot session, and appeared in the fireplace with soot on one sleeve and the slightly windswept look of someone who was still, for days after his exoneration, slightly incredulous about the ability to use the Fleur network like a normal person without ministry surveillance. He was healthier than he had looked at the Wisengamot. Still thin, still carrying the years in the way that Azkaban left marks that sleep and food only partially addressed, but the color was returning, and his eyes had the light in them that Harry remembered from the brief summer at Grimmauld Place, before the Department of Mysteries, before the Veil, before. Harry's mind stopped on that thought and he let it pass. This version of his godfather was alive. That was the fact to inhabit. "Nice house," Sirius said, looking around the parlor with the appreciative eye of someone who had grown up in Black Manor and understood the grammar of old magical spaces. "Much better energy than Grimmauld Place. Grimmauld Place feels like it's annoyed at everyone. This feels like it's been waiting." "It has," Harry said. 18 years. They settled in the parlor with tea that Thistlewick produced with obvious pleasure at having enough people in the house to justify a proper service. Ron came in from the garden where he had been doing something with a quaffle and a set of improvised targets that Harry suspected was less practice and more stress management, and Hermione descended from the library with a book open at a specific page and the look of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for and is not entirely happy about it. "There is a counterrite," she said, without preamble. The room went still. "It's called the dissolution of investiture," she said. It was documented in the late 14th century by a wizard named Aldrich Corvin, who was attempting to systematize existing knowledge about the protocol. He found 3 references to a ritual that could theoretically challenge the protocol's identification. She looked up from the book. It requires 3 specific components. The first is a place of ancient magical significance tied to the sovereign's bloodline. The second is a ritual working by at least 3 practitioners of significant dark magical power. The third, she stopped. "What's the third?" Ron asked. "The ritual requires the deaths of 3 people with direct blood ties to the sovereign's identified lineage," Hermione said quietly. "Specifically through the primary bloodline the protocol identified, in Harry's case, the Peverell line." "Who in my bloodline is still alive?" Harry said. "The Peverell line is so old that it's distributed through half the magical families in Britain," Hermione said. "But in terms of direct traceable descent in the active magical community, close enough to count for a ritual working," she consulted the page. "Corvin's notes specify 3 degrees of separation. Within 3 degrees. Harry was already thinking through it. "Sirius through the Black family," he said. "The Blacks have Peverell descent through the Gaunt line." "Yes," Hermione said. "And there are at least 2 or 3 others in the Sacred 28 with that specific lineage." "Correct. So Lucius doesn't need to target Harry directly," Ron said, working through it. "He just needs people connected to Harry's bloodline. And he wouldn't be doing it openly," Harry said. "He'd make it look like accidents. Illness. Misfortune." He was very still, and very focused. "How confident is Corvin's documentation?" "The ritual is real," Hermione said. "I found 2 corroborating references in texts from this library, one from the 1600s, one earlier. The ritual exists." She closed the book. "But there's a condition Corvin notes that complicates the attempt. The protocol has an awareness of its own continuity. If the sovereign is living and the protocol is active, any attempt to work the dissolution triggers he calls it a resonance warning. The sovereign will feel it if the ritual begins." "Like an alarm," Harry said. "More than an alarm. The text says, the sovereign will know the working's location, its participants, and its progress, as the protocol defends its own existence." She looked at Harry. "Basically, if Lucius tries to run this ritual, you'll know. But only once it's started. Not before." "Which means he's already gathering what he needs," Harry said. "The working takes time to prepare. He can collect the components, identify the location, assemble the participants, all of that is invisible to the protocol's detection. Only the actual ritual working triggers it. So we need to stop him before he starts," Ron said. "Or be ready to stop him the moment he does," Harry said. He looked at Sirius. "You're the most obvious target. Your Peverell descent through the Black line is the best documented. Sirius met his eyes without looking particularly alarmed about this, which was either bravery or the particular equanimity of someone who had already died once and didn't find the prospect of being a target especially novel. "I can take care of myself," he said. "I know you can," Harry said. "I'm not wrapping you in cotton. I need you aware and I need you not going anywhere alone until we know where Lucius is with his preparations. I'll have Gringotts surveil the Malfoy properties," Harry continued, pulling out parchment. "The bank has intelligence networks the Ministry doesn't. They track the magical activity around any vault that's been flagged, and the Malfoy vaults are frozen, which means Gringotts is already watching." He began writing. "I need to know if Lucius has accessed any properties with ancient magical significance. That's the first component. The manor itself is a site of ancient significance," Hermione said. "He wouldn't use his own property," Harry said. "Too obvious, too trackable. He'll use something off the record. A site that isn't connected to the Malfoy name formally." He paused. "Draco said the guests on Sunday night were people he didn't recognize. Not social contacts. Practitioners. Death Eaters," Ron said flatly. "Possibly. Or people adjacent to that world who have been careful enough to avoid the documented lists." Harry sealed the letter to Ragnarok and set it aside for Thistlewick to dispatch. "Here's the thing about Lucius," he said, looking at the others. "He's not going to rush this. He's careful, methodical, and patient when patience serves him. If we react too visibly, if we show we know what he's planning, he'll pull back and wait for a better moment. So we let him prepare," Ron said, not entirely happy about it. "We let him prepare while we prepare better," Harry said. "The audit is already in motion. Every piece of information it surfaces about the Malfoy family's seat and assets goes directly to Amelia Bones. As of the end of this week, I need Sirius appointed to the Black family Wisengamot seat. The Black family has a seat that's been unoccupied since Sirius was imprisoned, and his exoneration restores his claim. I want that seat active." "That's 11 votes in the chamber," Hermione said, calculating. "With the confirmed allies, it's enough to run the third phase agenda items without needing to fight for every procedural step," Harry confirmed. He looked at Sirius. "Can you do the political work?" "The Wisengamot session, the formal reinstatement. I spent 12 years in Azkaban," Sirius said dryly. "I think I can manage a Wisengamot session." "I mean the social architecture of it," Harry said. "The old families who aren't aligned with Lucius but aren't sure which way to move. The ones who were on their knees and are currently doing the political math about what that means for their long-term interests. They need someone to talk to who can hold a conversation about the old protocols and why aligning with the sovereignty is the strategically sound choice." Sirius looked at him. "You want me to schmooze the Sacred 28 on your behalf?" "I want you to talk to old family contacts," Harry said. "Using your charm and your social history and the goodwill of your recent exoneration." "Yes. Essentially." "The indignity," Sirius said, with a tone that suggested he found it entirely reasonable and was enjoying Harry's directness about it. "If it helps," Ron offered, "Harry is also asking Hermione to do the most boring legal research in recorded history and me to sit in a garden throwing a quaffle at a wall, so none of us are getting the fun jobs." "The garden work is important," Harry said, without looking up from the next letter he was drafting. "You literally just made that up. It keeps you from getting antsy." "Antsy Ron makes mistakes." Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and then after a pause said, "That's actually fair," with the air of someone conceding a point they find personally unflattering. Amelia Bones sent her preliminary audit findings on Thursday. Harry read them at the kitchen table over breakfast, and the further he got through the document, the quieter he became, which was the kind of quiet that Ron and Hermione had learned over 5 years was the one that preceded things happening. 7 Wisengamot seats were holding under false blood status records, families that had claimed pureblood classification in the 1709 codification by falsifying genealogical records and had maintained the falsification ever since. 3 seats were held by proxy for imprisoned Death Eaters, the proxy documentation having been approved in 1981 by ministry officials who were themselves now on the flagged list. 4 seats had been voted into existence between 1979 and 1981 by a vote of the Wisingamat that had been conducted during a period when Death Eater presence in the chamber had constituted a majority. The Wisingamat had voted to give itself seats, while under Death Eater majority control, in the middle of a war. "This is extraordinary," Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. She was using her voice for things that were beyond ordinary language. "Bones knew," Harry said. "She's known for years. She just couldn't do anything about it because she didn't have the authority to force disclosure, and every time she tried to initiate formal proceedings she got blocked by the ministry." He set the document down. "She's been waiting for exactly this. She's used the audit provision to do in a week what she's been blocked from doing for years," Hermione said. "Smart woman," Ron said, through toast. "She's going to need sovereign authority to formally void the 3 proxy seats," Harry said. "And the 4 seats voted in under Death Eater majority need to be nullified. That vote was conducted illegitimately, which means the seats that resulted from it have no valid basis." He did the arithmetic. 7 seats removed. The composition of the Wisingamat shifts significantly. The old guard loses its blocking majority. "Lucius will challenge the nullification," Hermione said. "He'll argue that the 1981 votes were conducted under existing procedural rules and that retroactive nullification violates. The fundamental legitimacy of a vote requires that the voting body itself is legitimately constituted," Harry said. "If the majority voting to create new seats was itself illegitimate, Death Eater members, some of whom were later convicted and imprisoned, then the vote is void. That's not retroactive application of new standards. That's applying the standard that was already supposed to apply. Can you argue that?" "You can argue that," Harry said. "I'll stand behind you while you do it, which in the current political context is functionally the same as me arguing it." Hermione looked briefly pleased and then pretended she hadn't. "When do you want to present this to the Wisingamat?" "Monday," Harry said. "Give Bones the weekend to prepare the formal documentation. I want to give Lucius as little time as possible to build procedural resistance." That weekend, Harry went to Godric's Hollow. He didn't tell anyone he was going, though he left a note so Hermione didn't mobilize the order. He went alone in the early morning, by apparition. His apparition was dramatically different now than it had been in practice, the magical core operating at full capacity making the process feel as simple as walking through a door, and he stood in front of the cottage that had been preserved as a memorial and looked at it for a long time. It was smaller than he had imagined. All ruined cottages are, probably, but this one particularly, the place where everything had started, where his parents had died, where something in the fabric of his life had been irrevocably altered, looked like a place where ordinary people had lived ordinary lives until they didn't. There was a flower wreath on the gate that someone had placed recently. The memorial plaque was weathered. He read it. He had read it before, once, in terrible circumstances. This time he read it differently, not as a wound but as a record. James Potter. Lily Potter. Beloved. Unforgotten. He stood there for 20 minutes in the early morning quiet and thought about what his parents had actually been, not the sanctified figures of grief, not the distant idealized portraits, but people who had been 21 years old and had made a choice and had meant it. His mother had been considered for magical law enforcement. His father had been a Quidditch player and a troublemaker and the kind of person whose friends had done genuinely significant things because of who he was to them. He thought about whether they would recognize him as he was now, 16 years old, standing in front of the place they had died, carrying an ancient sovereignty in his bones and a clear sense of purpose and a set of political problems that would have seemed entirely abstract to the 21-year-olds who had lived here. He thought they would. Not because he had earned it yet, but because they had been the people who produced him, and what he was carrying felt consistent with what they had been. He walked away from the cottage and stood at the edge of the village green and took out the small journal he had started keeping at Sovereign's Rest. Hermione had given it to him on Wednesday, wordlessly, along with a self-inking quill, because Hermione understood that some things needed writing down before they could be thought through properly. He wrote down the names of every person whose life had been materially damaged by the structures he was working to change. Sirius. The wrongfully imprisoned. The families who had been terrorized into compliance. Cedric, whose death had been engineered by a political and magical system so corrupt that it had been incapable of recognizing the danger building within it until the danger wore a face at a Triwizard Cup and killed a 17-year-old boy. He wrote Neville's name. The Longbottoms. He wrote his own parents' names at the bottom. Then he closed the journal and went back to work. Monday's Wisengamot session was different from the previous one in character, less raw shock, more organized resistance. The chamber had had nearly 2 weeks to adjust to the new reality, and adjustment in political bodies meant the formation of factions. Harry could see it in the seating patterns, the way certain members had clustered, the sidelong communications happening in the seconds before Amelia Bones called the session to order. Lucius Malfoy's faction was the most visible, 6 members sitting with the careful proximity of people who had agreed on a strategy and were maintaining unified posture. Not enough to block things outright, but enough to complicate. The counterfaction, members who had recognized that aligning with the sovereignty was strategically sound, was larger than Harry had expected. Sirius had been busy over the weekend. For family heads who had been neutral were now sitting in the moderate block rather than the Malfoy cluster, which was a better result than Harry had projected. Harry presented the audit findings. He gave Bones the floor for the legal analysis. She was more credible here, in her own domain, and the chamber knew her record, and watched the room while she laid out the case for the 7 invalidated seats and the 3 void proxies. The Malfoy faction's response was organized and legally competent. Their spokesperson was not Lucius himself but a witch named Dolohov Reeves, a specialist in magical contract law who had clearly been retained for this specific argument and had an extensive prepared presentation that she delivered with the polished confidence of someone very well paid. Harry let her finish. Then he stood up. Everything Madame Dolohov Reeves has presented, he said, assumes that the procedural rules governing those votes were themselves valid at the time of the votes. That assumption requires the voting body to have been legitimately constituted. He let a pause settle. The Wisengamot Act of 1735 specifies that membership in this body requires that the member hold their seat through legitimate claim and have no outstanding allegiance to any foreign power or declared enemy of the magical state. In 1981, at least 9 members of this body were Death Eaters, confirmed by subsequent convictions and their own sworn statements at their trials. Their allegiance to Voldemort constituted exactly the kind of disqualifying allegiance the 1735 Act was written to exclude. He looked around the room. Their presence didn't just affect those specific votes. It retroactively questions every major vote they participated in during their tenure. I am not voiding those votes. I am applying the standard this chamber was supposed to apply in 1981 and didn't because the corruption was too comprehensive for the remaining legitimate members to overcome. Dolohov Reeves stood to object. The question, Harry continued, before she could speak, is not whether these seats should be voided. The protocol is clear on that. The question is whether this chamber wants to handle the transition orderly or disorderly, because either way the protocol's authority supersedes the challenge. He looked at the Malfoy faction. I'd prefer orderly. Lucius Malfoy, who had not spoken yet, looked at Harry with the expression of a man making a very large calculation very quickly, and then said, smoothly and carefully, the Malfoy family has no objection to an orderly transition process, provided that the sovereign's authority is exercised within documented protocol parameters. It was a pivot. A smooth, intelligent, immediate pivot. Lucius had calculated that the vote was going to go against him and had decided to get ahead of it rather than fight from behind. Harry acknowledged it with a single nod. That's all I'm asking. The vote passed 15-6. 7 seats were formally suspended pending review. Sirius was formally seated in the Black family chair in the same session, which Bones moved and which passed with a margin that made the room feel slightly different. There was a kind of moral logic in it, the world running the correction it had owed for 12 years. Afterward, In the atrium of the ministry, while people moved around them with the particular studied non-attention of civil servants who have collectively decided that looking at the sovereign of magic directly was above their pay grade, Lucius Malfoy appeared at Harry's elbow. Not confrontationally. Not with performance. He was simply there, walking alongside Harry toward the lifts with the air of a man who has decided to have a conversation. "The protocol's guest," Lucius said, pleasantly. "A word." Harry kept walking. "You have as long as it takes to reach the lift." "I want you to understand something," Lucius said, and his voice was very quiet and very composed. "Everything I have done, everything I do, it is in service of a world in which our kind survives. You may find my methods repugnant. You may find my reasoning antique. But the fear that drives it is not unreasonable. Dilution, assimilation, the gradual erosion of what makes us distinct and powerful and separate, your kind," Harry said, "nearly destroyed the wizarding world twice in 30 years because that distinct and powerful and separate mythology made it easy for a man who was, by every measure you claim to value, not actually pureblood, to build an army of people desperate to believe they were better than someone." A pause. "Voldemort was a half-blood," Harry said. "You knew that. Every Death Eater of significance knew that. And they followed him anyway, because what he was selling wasn't actually about bloodlines. It was about fear and dominance and the need to have someone to be above. The bloodline mythology was the product label. Not the product." He glanced at Lucius. "I understand what you want to protect. I don't think you've ever honestly looked at what you've actually been protecting it with." The lift arrived. Harry stepped in. He did not look back. But he felt Lucius Malfoy standing in the atrium long after the doors closed, and in the particular awareness the protocol gave him of the magical signatures around him, he felt the quality of what Lucius was feeling, not anger, not immediately, something more complex, more difficult, and more dangerous. A man who has just been handed a truth he can't refute and has decided to find a different way to win. Hermione and Ron were waiting in the lift when it reached his floor. They had taken a separate one, standard procedure now, which Ron had suggested and Hermione had immediately drafted a protocol around, because that was who they were. "How did it go?" Ron said. "The votes passed," Harry said. "And Malfoy?" Harry thought about the conversation in the atrium. About Draco appearing at his door in the early morning. About the guests at Malfoy Manor on Sunday night and the fact that the ritual components hadn't been sourced yet. He would know if they had, the protocol would tell him, but the planning was in motion, and Lucius Malfoy had just had a conversation that confirmed, if he had any doubt, that the argument he had been making his entire adult life was not going to survive what Harry was building. "He's going to move soon," Harry said. "How soon?" Hermione asked. Harry looked at the ministry atrium through the lift's gate as they ascended, at the golden statues and the tile floors and the civil servants going about the work of governing a world that was mid-transformation. "Soon enough that we need to be ready before the week is out," he said. He was right by 2 days. Chapter 4, The Counterite. The protocol's warning came at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday. Harry was asleep when it hit, not gently, not the way an alarm clock works, but the way a cold hand on the back of the neck works, immediate and total. He was upright in bed before he was fully conscious, wand in hand, and the information was already there, pressed into his awareness with the particular clarity of something that had been waiting to be transmitted. Location: the ruins of Corvin's Reach, a pre-ministry magical site in the Cairngorms. Participants: 4 practitioners, 3 of whom had magical signatures Harry didn't recognize and one of whom was absolutely unmistakable. Components: assembled and active. Stage: early preparation, not yet irreversible. The 4th signature was Walden McNair. Harry was dressed and downstairs in 3 minutes. Ron was already in the kitchen. He had taken to sleeping lightly, an old Hogwarts habit that the current situation had sharpened back into usefulness, and took one look at Harry's face and went for his wand and his boots without a word. Hermione came down 30 seconds later, hair loose, robes thrown over pajamas, with her research bag already over her shoulder because Hermione Granger had apparently decided at some point in the last week to sleep with her research bag within arm's reach. "It started," Harry said. "Cairngorms. 4 of them." Hermione's face went sharp. "How far along?" "Early. The site preparation is active but the working itself hasn't begun." Harry was pulling on his outer robes. "We have maybe an hour before it reaches the point where interruption becomes dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Ron said. "If a ritual working of this magnitude is interrupted mid-process rather than before it starts, the backlash affects everyone in the radius," Hermione said, because she had read Corvin's full documentation 3 times since Thursday and had the relevant passages memorized. "Including the people interrupting it." "So we stop it before it starts," Harry said. "Or we stop the practitioners before they reach the critical stage." He paused. "Sirius. He's at the Black Townhouse," Hermione said. "Wake him. Tell him to get to a secondary location, not Grimmauld Place, not here, somewhere new that's not in any record connected to his name. I'll owl him details once we're back." Harry was already moving toward the door. "And I need Ragnarok contacted. If Gringotts has been surveilling Malfoy property movements, they may have documentation of how McNair got to this site. I want a record of everything before this evening is over." "I'll handle Ragnarok," Hermione said. She handed Harry a folded piece of parchment. "I prepared this last Thursday. Location map of all preministry magical sites in Scotland with Peveril bloodline resonance. Corvin's reach is on it." Harry looked at her. "You prepared this last Thursday. You said Lucius would move before the end of the week," she said. "I believed you." Ron was already at the door. "Can we move? Only I'd quite like to stop the dark ritual murder plot while we still have the option. They operate to the edge of the Cairngorm boundary, where the wild magic in the landscape thicken enough to make direct apparition into the site itself unreliable, old places pushed back against arbitrary arrivals, and Corvin's Reach specifically was one of those locations that the magical geography of Britain had been quietly defending since before anyone alive had been born. The night was cold and absolutely clear, the kind of Scottish darkness that has no light pollution to soften it, stars dense overhead and the mountains black shapes against a slightly less black sky. Harry felt the working immediately, not with his physical senses but with the protocol's awareness, a low grinding pressure in his sternum like the magical equivalent of the feeling before a thunderstorm. Still early stage. Still stoppable. "Northeast," he said. 10 minutes at pace. They moved through the heather in silence. Ron, to his considerable credit, was completely noiseless in rough terrain, a consequence, Harry had always supposed, of growing up in a house with 5 older brothers and learning early that audibility had consequences. Hermione had cast a muffling charm on all 3 of them before they left the apparition point. The site was a circle of standing stones, not dramatic, not Stonehenge impressive, lower and rougher than that, the stones at uneven heights as if they had grown rather than been placed, which in a very real sense was probably accurate. There was a fire in the center, built in the old way, with specific wood and specific timing, and the 4 figures moving around it were already deep enough in preparation that they hadn't registered the approach. Harry stopped 20 meters back and assessed. McNair was the largest of them, broad and heavy-shouldered, moving with the deliberate focus of someone performing a ritual they had rehearsed. 2 of the unknowns were women, one older and one middle-aged, both wearing the kind of plain dark robes that said this was working dress rather than ceremony. The 4th was a man Harry placed at about 40, moving with an economy of motion that suggested real skill. The components were laid out inside the stone circle. Harry didn't look at them in detail. He had read enough of Corvin's documentation with Hermione to know that the specific components required for the dissolution included materials that were not available through legitimate magical supply chains, which meant Lucius had been sourcing them for at minimum several weeks, probably longer. The preparation had started before the Wisengamot session. Before the freeze on the Malfoy vaults. Possibly before the Gringotts ritual. Lucius had not been waiting to see what Harry would do. He had been moving in parallel from the beginning, simultaneously presenting a composed political face and running this preparation in the background. Harry filed that characterization away for later and focused on the present problem. "I can disrupt the site without going in," he said quietly, to Hermione and Ron. "Pull the fire, scatter the component arrangement. But I want the practitioners intact for questioning." 4-3, Ron said, also quietly. "Better odds than usual." "McNair is experienced and dangerous," Harry said. "Don't underestimate him because he spent the last year doing ministry executions. He had a career before that." He looked at both of them. "Nobody gets heroic. We go in together, we contain them, we don't let this turn into a prolonged duel if we can help it." "Binding curses," Hermione said. "All three of us on McNair first, simultaneously, the moment they register us. He's the most dangerous and the most likely to react with lethal force immediately." "Agreed," Harry said. "On my count." He stood up from the heather and walked forward into the firelight. They registered him at about 12 meters, the older woman first, then the skilled man, their heads coming up with the specific alertness of people whose peripheral awareness had been trained by doing things that required awareness. McNair turned last, from the far side of the fire, and his face in the orange light went through surprise and then landed on something colder. "Potter," McNair said. "McNair," Harry said pleasantly. "Step away from the component layout." "You're a child," McNair said, and his wand was already out. "You have no idea what you're interrupting." "A dissolution of investiture ritual," Harry said, still walking forward. "Corvin's formulation, circa 1347. Using this site because it has Peveril bloodline resonance going back to the 11th century. The components on the ground include elderroot ash, night harvest mistletoe, and something I suspect you had to pay an uncomfortable amount of money for." He stopped at the edge of the stone circle. "I know exactly what I'm interrupting. Step away from it." The skilled man moved first, not for McNair, for the component layout, going for the centerpiece of the arrangement with the intention of either accelerating the working or protecting it. Harry hit him with a full-body binding hex before he reached it, powerful enough that the man's robes snapped with the force of the impact and he went down on the heather like he'd been frozen mid-step. Hermione hit McNair at the same moment with a binding that wrapped him from ankles to shoulders in luminous cord, and Ron dealt with the older woman with a stupefy that was honest and efficient and did the job. The middle-aged woman ran. Harry let her go 3 steps, flicked his wand in her direction with the specific precision of someone working with a magical core at full capacity, and she was lifted off the ground by an invisible arrest, feet dangling 8 inches above the heather, her own wand spinning away into the dark. "I said step away," Harry said. He walked into the stone circle and crouched beside the component layout. "Ron, can you get a documentation spell running? I want a full record of what's here." Ron already had his wand out and was running a photographic documentation charm around the inside of the circle, moving methodically. Hermione was standing over McNair with an expression that was not quite cold and not quite angry but was the specific thing that existed between those two emotions in someone with very good recall of a 14-year-old boy dying in a tournament that everyone had known was compromised. "Where's Lucius Malfoy?" Harry said to McNair. The bound man's jaw was set and his eyes were hard and he said nothing. "That's all right," Harry said. "I don't actually need you to tell me. Gringotts has been tracking the magical activity around his properties since Monday and the protocol knows who activated this site. The record already exists." He stood up. "The question I'm actually asking is whether you want to cooperate with the Ministry investigation, which will happen regardless, or whether you want to be the person who didn't cooperate and let Lucius take the arrangement that comes with that." McNair's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A very small and very involuntary calculation running behind the controlled surface. "He'll leave you to it," Harry said. "Not unkindly. That's who Lucius Malfoy is. When the options are between taking the consequences himself and having someone else take them, he takes the someone else every time. You know that." A pause. "He's in the country," McNair said, and even that much came out as if each word was a physical object being handed over against the owner's will. Not the manor. He left before midnight. I don't know where. Harry nodded. Thank you. He scattered the component arrangement with a careful transfiguration, not destroying it, because it was evidence, but rendering it inert by changing the specific spatial relationships between the elements that made the ritual viable. The fire in the center of the stone circle went out without drama. The grinding pressure in his sternum released, and the mountain air felt lighter. He left McNair and the other 3 practitioners bound and warded inside the stone circle with ascending Patronus, his stag, bright and definite in the cold dark, dispatched to Amelia Bones at the ministry with the location and the situation, and he walked back through the heather with Ron and Hermione toward the apparition point. He wasn't here himself, Ron said, after a moment. No, Harry said. Delegated the actual ritual work. Lucius doesn't get his hands dirty directly, Harry said. He never has. He sets conditions and resources and personnel and lets other people take the operational risk. If this had worked, he would have had complete deniability. He wasn't present, he has an alibi, the practitioners are his pawns rather than his documented associates. But the documentation from Gringotts, Hermione started. We'll show the Malfoy vaults funding the component sourcing, Harry said. Yes. Except the vaults are frozen, which means any transactions that went through them in the last week are already flagged and recorded by Gringotts independently. He stopped walking. He's been planning this since before we froze the vaults, which means the funding went through before Monday. He expected the freeze and moved the resources ahead of it. He's very good, Hermione said, not admiringly, but accurately. He's had 30 years of practice, Harry said. But being very good at moving fast enough to stay ahead of oversight only works when oversight is reactive. He started walking again. We were already watching. We were already building the record. The documentation exists. Bones will have it by morning. They apparat back to the manor. Harry sat at the kitchen table while Hermione drafted the full incident report for Bones and Ron produced food from somewhere with the cheerful practicality of someone who had grown up with 6 siblings and considered feeding people in stressful situations a primary love language. Harry wrote 2 letters. The first was to Ragnarok, confirming the Cairngorms incident and requesting the Gringotts surveillance records from the past 3 weeks covering all Malfoy-connected accounts and properties, to be delivered directly to Amelia Bones with a copy retained in Gringotts' sovereignty file. The second was to Lucius Malfoy. It was very short. It said, I have the documentation. You have until Friday to present yourself to the ministry voluntarily. I would recommend it. He sent the second letter by the manor's owl at 3:30 in the morning, which meant it would arrive at wherever Lucius currently was in approximately 2 hours, and Lucius would read it in the pre-dawn dark and understand several things simultaneously, that Harry had been at the site, that the working had failed, that the documentation existed, and that Harry was giving him an option. Not out of mercy. Out of strategy. A voluntary surrender with cooperation was worth considerably more in terms of information and precedent than an arrest that Lucius's legal team, which was excellent and well-funded, would spend years complicating. If Lucius came in voluntarily, he came in because the calculus told him it was the best available option, which meant the information he provided under those conditions would be real rather than managed. And the precedent of a Malfoy presenting himself to ministry custody was itself a political event with consequences in the sacred 28 that Harry had already thought through. You're giving him a way out, Ron said, reading the letter over Harry's shoulder. I'm giving him the least bad option from a set of bad options, Harry said. Whether he takes it or picks a worse one is up to him. And if he runs? Ron said. Then the protocol knows his magical signature and so does Gringotts and so does the ministry, and there is no place in magical Britain he can go that isn't connected to a record we already hold. Running makes it worse and he knows it. Harry sealed the letter. He'll come in. Ron looked skeptical. He's not irrational, Harry said. That's the thing about Lucius. He's done terrible things and he believes terrible things, but he does them from a position of rational self-interest. When self-interest points at surrender, he'll surrender. Ron thought about it. You understand him a lot better than I'd be comfortable with, he said. I've been paying attention to how he operates since my second year, Harry said. It's not respect. It's intelligence about someone I need to deal with effectively. Right, Ron said. He sat down across from Harry and propped his chin on his hand. What about Draco? When his father comes in, Draco made his own decision to come here and ask questions, Harry said. Whatever happens with Lucius is Lucius's consequence, not Draco's. He paused. But it's going to be hard for him. Regardless of what he's starting to understand about his father. Feels weird being sympathetic about Malfoy, Ron said. Draco isn't his father, Harry said. No, Ron agreed, slowly. He's really not, is he? He said it as if confirming something he had been working out for a while. Amelia Bones arrived at Sovereign's Rest at 8 in the morning, which was earlier than Harry had expected, and confirmed that she had not slept. She came with 2 hit wizards and a case full of documents, sat down at the kitchen table, accepted tea with the air of someone who needed it medically, and spread the Gringotts records across the table surface with the precision of a woman who has been waiting to do this exact thing for a long time. The picture the records built was comprehensive and damning. The component sourcing for the dissolution ritual had been funded through a Malfoy family trust account, not the primary vault, a secondary trust established in 1962 for what was listed as charitable donations, that had been moving funds to 3 anonymous intermediaries over the course of 6 weeks. The earliest transaction was dated 2 weeks before Harry's birthday. Before the Gringotts ritual. Before any of the public events of the last 3 weeks. He was planning this before he knew what the Gringotts audit would produce, Bones said. He knew what it would produce, Harry said. He didn't know the specific timing, but he'd have known the Peveril bloodline was close enough to triggering the sovereignty protocol to warrant contingency planning. He's been waiting for this for years. He was going to kill members of your bloodline before you could be formally identified, Hermione said quietly. Preemptively. To prevent the protocol from triggering. He didn't go through with it before the ritual, Harry said. Which means the killing was supposed to happen as part of the working itself. The dissolution requires the deaths to occur within the ritual space, as part of the working. McNair and the others were going to be the ones to commit them. He looked at Bones. Who were the targets? Bones spread 3 additional documents. Based on the Gringotts records and the preliminary interrogation of the practitioners taken at the site, she placed the papers. Sirius Black. A Peveril line descendant named Helena Avery Price, currently resident in Edinburgh. And yourself. Me, Harry said. The dissolution requires 3 deaths, Bones confirmed. If the Sovereign is one of the 3, the protocol collapses rather than transfers. Corvin's notes, she glanced at Hermione. I found the same passage, Hermione said. If the Sovereign's death is one of the 3 ritual deaths, the sovereignty is permanently extinguished rather than held in abeyance pending a new identification. Harry absorbed this. Not with alarm, the working had failed, the practitioners were in custody, the threat was neutralized, but with the particular clarity of understanding the full scope of what had almost happened. Lucius had not been planning to compete with him. He had been planning to end the sovereignty permanently, kill the only person who could hold it, and restore a world in which the structures that protected his way of life had no check above them. Helena Avery Price, Harry said. Is she aware of her bloodline connection? Almost certainly not, Bones said. The Peveril descent at that degree of removal is not commonly known. She would not have had any reason to consider herself at risk. I want her notified and protected, Harry said. Today. Already in progress, Bones said. And McNair. The others. In ministry custody as of 4 this morning, Bones said. The skilled man you bound at the site is one Thaddeus Croft. He has a history in dark magical working going back to the First War, has been living under a false identity in Wales for the past decade. He has already indicated willingness to cooperate in exchange for a sentencing consideration. She paused. His testimony places Lucius Malfoy as the organizing intelligence behind the ritual, the funding source, and the individual who identified the 3 targets. Direct testimony, Harry said. On the record. Then Lucius's letter this morning is the least of his problems, Harry said. Croft's testimony plus the Gringotts records plus the site documentation is enough for a formal arrest warrant regardless of whether Lucius presents himself voluntarily. Bones looked at him. I have the warrant prepared, she said. I was waiting to see what you wanted. Harry thought about it for a clean 30 seconds. Execute the warrant, he said. If he comes in voluntarily in the meantime, document the voluntary aspect, because it matters for cooperation. But don't hold the warrant waiting for him to feel like it. Bones nodded and produced a quill. There's one more thing, Harry said. Croft's testimony and the Gringotts records are going to be public record as part of the criminal proceedings. That means the full scope of what Lucius was planning becomes visible to the Wizengamot and the broader magical community. He looked at Bones. I want to be clear that I'm not seeking the harshest available sentence for Lucius. Azkaban, yes, this is attempted murder of the Sovereign of Magic plus 2 civilians, it demands Azkaban. But I want the proceedings conducted by the book, completely by the book, with full rights of legal representation and proper procedure. No cutting corners because the target is high profile. Bones looked at him with the monocle expression. You want it unimpeachable. I want it to be what it should be, Harry said. A fair proceeding with evidence and procedure and a verdict that means what it says. Not a political execution. Bones was quiet for a moment. Your father, she said, was a good man. I knew him slightly, we overlapped at the ministry for about a year. He would have liked the way you think. Harry didn't say anything. He picked up his tea. I'll have my department at the Malfoy properties within the hour, Bones said, standing. She collected her documents with efficient speed. The warrant will be formally issued at 9. If Lucius presents voluntarily, I'll contact you directly. She paused at the kitchen door. The Helena Avery Price situation, I'll handle it personally. She deserves to hear it from someone with appropriate authority. Thank you, Harry said. She left. The kitchen was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that follows the departure of a significant amount of purposeful energy. That was well handled, Hermione said. Don't, Harry said. I mean it, she said. The insistence on proper procedure, it matters. It sets a precedent. If you use your authority to cut corners in a way that benefits you, you become the thing you're replacing. I know, Harry said. That's why I said it. Ron was eating something and had been quiet through the Bones conversation with the focused attention he deployed for situations he recognized as important. When will we know if Lucius comes in, he said. Before noon, Harry said. He'll have read the letter by 6 this morning. He has roughly 4 hours to do his calculations and make a decision. Lucius Malfoy presented himself to the Ministry of Magic at 11:47. Harry knew before Bones sent word, because the protocol registered the change in Lucius's magical location, from the unregistered safe house in Wiltshire where he had been since midnight to the Ministry atrium, with the same ambient awareness that had become, over the past 2 weeks, as natural as knowing where his own hands were. He was sitting in the library, reading, when the Bones message arrived. He read it, set it on the table, and went back to his book. Ron watched him. That's it. He comes in and you just, keep reading. What would you like me to do? Harry said. I don't know, celebrate. He tried to have you killed and now he's in Ministry custody. That seems like a moment. It's a step, Harry said. There are more steps after it. But he looked up from his book and at Ron's open, exasperated, fundamentally decent face, and felt something that was lighter than the last several days of weight. Fine, he said. 10 points to Gryffindor. We got him. Ron pointed at him. Don't be patronizing. You're right. That was patronizing. Harry set the book down entirely. Lucius Malfoy, who has been running Death Eater operations and political corruption and tonight tried to permanently end the sovereignty of magic by having me killed, is in Ministry custody. That is genuinely significant and worth acknowledging. Thank you, Ron said. You're welcome. Also, Ron said, I'm still annoyed about the garden quaffle thing. The garden quaffle thing was a legitimate strategy. It absolutely was not. It kept you nearby and mobile and physically prepared without making you anxious, Harry said. Which is a thing I needed from you this week without being able to explain why yet. Ron stared at him. You're exhausting, he said. You know that? Completely exhausting. But the smile was already there. Draco appeared at Sovereign's Rest that afternoon. Not in the morning this time, not in the careful preparatory quiet. He arrived at 2 o'clock with the particular look of someone who has received news that he knew intellectually was coming and that has hit him emotionally in a way he hadn't fully prepared for. He was let through the gate because Harry had told Thistlewick to let him through if he came, and he arrived at the library door and stopped there, and the question of whether he would come in or not hung in the air for a moment. He came in. Harry was alone. Hermione had gone to Diagon Alley for supplies and because she needed to clear her head, and Ron was in the kitchen doing something complicated with what remained of the breakfast provisions, the sounds of which constituted an ongoing low-level argument between him and the kitchen's self-organizing shelving system. You knew, Draco said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement looking for confirmation. I knew he was planning something, Harry said. I didn't know the full scope until last night. Draco sat down, not in the visitor's chair this time but at the corner of the table, sideways, which was the sitting position of someone not committing to presence but not quite standing either. He looked at the table surface. He tried to have you killed, he said. Yes. And 2 other people. Yes. A long pause. He didn't tell me, Draco said. And the way he said it, not defensively, not performing shock, was the voice of someone having a very specific interior experience, the moment when you stop being able to explain away the evidence about someone you love. Harry didn't say anything. There wasn't a lot to say to that. I knew he was planning something in response to the protocol, Draco said. The guests, the late nights. I thought it was political. Legal challenge. He's very good at legal challenge. He stopped. Looked up at Harry. He was going to kill you. He was going to have someone else kill me, Harry said. Lucius doesn't, that's not better, Draco said, sharply. No, Harry agreed. It isn't. Draco looked at his hands on the table for a moment. What happens to him now? Trial, Harry said. Proper proceeding, full rights. The evidence is comprehensive. It will almost certainly result in Azkaban. His assets, Draco said. The family holdings, the seat audit is already in progress. The criminal proceedings will have implications for the legal standing of assets acquired through methods that come out in trial. Harry looked at him steadily. I'm not going to strip your family's legitimate assets to punish him. If the manor was legitimately acquired and the Malfoy estate is legitimately grounded, it survives. If parts of it weren't, that comes out in proper process and the appropriate correction is made through proper process. He paused. What's legitimately yours will still be yours. Draco absorbed this. You've already thought through what happens to me. I've thought through what's fair, Harry said. Which isn't the same thing, necessarily. Draco was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the sounds from the kitchen, Ron losing an argument with a self-organizing shelf and saying something emphatic about it, filtered in and out of the silence. I'm not going to thank you, Draco said finally. I'm not asking you to. Because it isn't a favor, what you're doing. It's just what should happen. He looked up. You're doing what should happen. Which is, he stopped again. Not what I expected, he finished. What did you expect? Harry said. Draco looked at him. Revenge, he said simply. Harry picked up his book again. "I'm not interested in revenge," he said. "I'm interested in things being better than they were." Draco stood up. He stood there for a moment, apparently deciding something that took some deciding, and then he said, "My father kept records. Everything he was involved in, Death Eater operations, Ministry corruption, Voldemort's organizational structure. He kept records because he believed information was the ultimate currency and documentation gave him leverage over everyone he worked with. I know where some of them are." He met Harry's eyes. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because it's the only way any of it ever actually ends." Harry set his book down. "Where are they?" "The manor has a secondary library," Draco said. "Below the main one. Behind a ward sequence I know how to disable. Will you take Amelia Bones there?" Draco's jaw tightened. "Yes. Today." A shorter pause. "Yes. Thank you, Draco." The Draco Malfoy who left the Library of Sovereign's Rest that afternoon was not the same as the one who had arrived at the door 2 days earlier, and was very far from the one Harry had faced across hallways and classrooms for 5 years. He walked with the particular quality of someone who has just put down something extremely heavy, and is both relieved and unsure of what to do with their hands. Harry watched him go and then looked back at the library, the shelves his family had built over centuries, the texts that had been waiting for him, the window that looked out over the manor grounds in the late afternoon light, and thought about all the records now in motion. Bones and the Cairngorm's testimony. The Gringotts documentation. Croft's cooperation. And now whatever Lucius had been careful enough to write down and Draco was careful enough to offer. The case was built. The process was moving. The thing that Lucius Malfoy had spent 30 years making untouchable was touching down, hard, in the specific kind of accountability that comes when you've been thorough and patient and done everything correctly. Ron appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs. "Tea." "The shelf one," he said. It reorganized everything by frequency of use and put the biscuits at the top. "I think it's punishing me for something." Harry took the mug. "What did you do to it?" "Nothing deliberate," Ron said. "I may have put a charms textbook in the potions section. The shelf has standards." "Apparently." Ron sat down. "Draco Malfoy just walked past me in the corridor and did not say anything offensive. That's the first time that's ever happened." "He's having a difficult day," Harry said. "Yeah." Ron looked at his tea. "Is he going to be all right?" Harry considered the question. "I think he might be," he said. "In the long run." Ron nodded. "Good," he said, simply. "I think that's good, actually." Outside, the afternoon light stretched long across the Wiltshire grounds, and the manor's wards held steady, and somewhere in a ministry holding cell Lucius Malfoy was sitting with his lawyer and the knowledge that his son had gone to Sovereign's Rest with information and that the architecture of protection he had built for 30 years had come apart in 3 weeks. At 5 o'clock, Amelia Bones sent a message. The secondary library beneath Malfoy Manor had contained documentation of Death Eater operations going back to 1973. Names, dates, locations. Operational records for both of Voldemort's rises. Financial records connecting 17 members of the British magical establishment to the funding of terrorist activities. Evidence of ministry corruption at levels that would restructure the audit proceedings and the criminal investigations for months. At the bottom of the case, wrapped in stasis charms and documented in Lucius's precise handwriting, was a full account of Peter Pettigrew's role in the betrayal of the Potters. Written in 1982. Kept as leverage over the Pettigrew who was alive and useful, and over the Dumbledore who knew more than he said, and over the political settlement that had let Sirius Black rot in Azkaban because the truth was inconvenient. Harry read the summary and sat with it. He thought about his parents in the cottage at Godric's Hollow. He thought about Sirius in the Wisengamot chamber with wet eyes. He thought about 12 seals and 40% capacity and a boy who had grown up in a cupboard under stairs, and he thought about all the decisions that had been made by powerful people without the consent of the people those decisions affected. He thought about what he was building and why, and whether it was the right shape. Then he picked up his quill and began drafting the framework for the Sovereign's Charter. Not because the moment called for it. Not because Hermione had been nudging him toward it for a week. But because the records in Lucius's hidden library were the perfect illustration of what happened in a world without accountability, without transparency, without a structure that placed justice above convenience. He wrote for 3 hours. Ron brought dinner and didn't interrupt. Hermione came back from Diagon Alley, read over his shoulder for 5 minutes, and then sat down and picked up her own quill and started improving it, which was the highest form of collaboration she knew how to offer. By midnight, they had something that looked like the beginning of something real. Chapter 5, The Sovereign's Charter. The Charter took 10 days to write properly. Not because the ideas were complicated, the core of it was simple enough that Harry had sketched the framework in 3 hours, but because simple ideas implemented badly are worse than no ideas at all, and Hermione had opinions about implementation that were both extensive and correct, and Harry had learned enough in the past 3 weeks to know the difference between moving fast and moving well. They worked at the library table. All 3 of them, most days, with Sirius drifting in and out and contributing the perspective of someone who had lived through the last war from the inside of the Order and then the inside of Azkaban and had arrived at some very clear opinions about what structural failures had made both of those things possible. Ragnarok sent a goblin legal consultant named Grimtooth, who was approximately 800 years old and had the accumulated institutional memory of an entity that had watched every British magical governance structure rise and fall since the Magna Carta, and whose contributions to the Charter's legal architecture were worth more than everything else combined. The blood status clause was the one everyone would notice. Harry wanted it simple: magical ability, not genealogy, shall constitute the basis for all rights, standing, and consideration under British magical law. 8 words that undid 300 years of codified prejudice. Grimtooth pointed out that the phrase consideration under was legally too broad and would create enforcement gaps, and spent 40 minutes replacing it with language that was both more precise and more powerful, which was the Goblin way and which Harry respected without reservation. The Wisengamot Reform Clause restructured the body from a hereditary chamber into a mixed system, a third of seats hereditary but subject to conduct review, a third elected from the broader magical community on a 7-year rotation, a third appointed by merit in specific areas of magical expertise. No family could hold more than 1 seat in any combination. No individual could hold a seat while under criminal investigation. That last provision had the particular timing of a document that knew what it was referencing. Lucius Malfoy's trial was proceeding. Bones was running it with the thoroughness of someone who had been waiting their entire career for sufficient authority to do so, and the evidence that Draco had led her to was producing charges that added up daily in the way that comprehensive documentation always does when an investigator finally has access to it. The trial itself was weeks away, but the arrest and the formal charges had already restructured the Malfoy faction in the Wisengamot. 3 of the 6 members who had clustered with Lucius had quietly repositioned themselves in the neutral bloc, because political alignment with a man under arrest for attempted murder of the Sovereign was a position that required constant recalculation. Harry did not follow the trial coverage closely. He noted the developments and moved on, because there was work to do and the work mattered more than watching Lucius's situation unfold. On the 5th day of drafting, he went to see Dumbledore. Not at Hogwarts. It was summer, the school was empty in the way that large buildings only are when they're between their purposes, and Harry had no desire to hold this conversation in the headmaster's office with all its portraits and its accumulated trappings of authority. He sent an owl to Dumbledore at his private residence in Northumberland, which Harry had found referenced in the Potter family correspondence files, and asked him to come to Sovereign's Rest. Dumbledore came the same day, which said something. They walked in the manor grounds rather than sitting inside, because the morning was fine and because conversation in motion had a different quality than conversation at a table, less confrontational, more honest, the forward momentum of walking substituting for the defensiveness that sitting across from someone in a formal space could generate. The Charter, Dumbledore said. Not a question. Sirius had kept him broadly informed. You've seen the outline, Harry said. I have. They walked along the south wall of the manor, where something that had once been a kitchen garden was returning to order under Thistlewick's attention, neat rows of herbs coming up between the stones. It's good work, Harry. The structural logic is sound. Merlin's original framing would recognize it. I need something from you before the Wisengamot session, Harry said. And I want to be straightforward about it. Please. The seals you placed on me, Harry said. I need you to provide a formal written account of them. Dated, purposed, contextualized. Not for legal proceedings, the Gringotts documentation covers that. For the public record. For the historical record. He looked at Dumbledore. Because when the charter is ratified and the new structure is in place, the question of how the previous structure failed will be important. Not to punish you. But because the way it failed needs to be understood so it can't happen the same way again. Dumbledore was quiet for several paces. You want me to document my own failures, he said. I want you to document your own decisions, Harry said. Failure is your characterization, not mine. What I need is the honest account. And if I provide it, Dumbledore said, what becomes of it? It goes into the Sovereign's historical archive, Harry said. Accessible to magical historians and eventually to the public, with appropriate context. Not weaponized. Not sensationalized. Just, there. Part of the real record of what happened. Dumbledore looked at the kitchen garden. His profile in the morning light was the face of someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and was being asked to set it down in a specific place, in a specific way, and who was discovering that the weight of the thing was not the same as the weight of the decision. You know, he said, when I look at you now, what you are, what you've become in 3 weeks, I find myself caught between pride and something I can only describe as grief. The pride is for who you are. The grief is for what was kept from you. He stopped walking. I cannot undo the seals. I cannot give back the years. But I can give you the honest account. He met Harry's eyes. Every decision, every date, every reasoning. You'll have it before the Wisengamot session. Thank you, Harry said. There is one thing I would ask, Dumbledore said, carefully. Not as a condition. Simply as a request. Ask. Peter Pettigrew. He looked at Harry with the particular gravity of someone who has been carrying a piece of information and has been waiting for the right moment. I know where he is. I have known for approximately 4 months. I have been, he paused. Managing the approach. Waiting for conditions that would allow his apprehension without alerting Voldemort and triggering a response. Harry looked at him. Tell me. He's at a safe house in Albania, Dumbledore said. Voldemort sent him there when the Ministry activity increased after the Department of Mysteries. He's running a supply operation, gathering components for Voldemort's next phase of activity. He's alone most days and the magical signature of the location is low enough that a targeted extraction can be done without alerting Voldemort, Harry finished. Yes. Harry thought about this. About Pettigrew alive and in Ministry custody and what that meant for Sirius's exoneration, already accomplished, but this made it bulletproof, unassailable, the kind of confirmation that closed every remaining question. It also meant Pettigrew could provide intelligence on Voldemort's current operations and planning. After the Wisengamot session, Harry said. I want Sirius part of the extraction team. I know that's understandable, Dumbledore said quietly. And I want it done cleanly. Full custody, Ministry record, proper treatment. Harry paused. He's a coward and a murderer and he destroyed my family. He still gets a trial. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. He does. They walked back toward the manor, and the morning light moved over the grounds, and between two people who had complicated reasons to trust each other and complicated histories of being unable to, something that was not forgiveness and not absolution but was adjacent to both of them settled into the space where unresolved things had been. It wasn't nothing. The night before the Wisengamot session, Harry couldn't sleep. Not anxiety, or not the kind of anxiety that came from uncertainty. More the particular wakefulness of someone standing at the edge of something they've been working toward and feeling the full weight of what it means. He sat in the library at 2 in the morning with the final draft of the charter in front of him and read through it one more time, not looking for errors. Hermione had found the errors, but feeling the shape of it. The blood status clause. The Wisengamot restructure. The goblin rights provision. The education reform article, which mandated Hogwarts and all magical educational institutions provide equal access regardless of blood status, and established a fund for Muggle-born students who needed resources that their non-magical families couldn't provide. The judicial reform section, which required trials within 60 days of arrest, mandatory legal representation for all accused, and an independent oversight body for the Magical Law Enforcement Department. It was not a perfect document. Harry knew that. Grimtooth had said, on the 9th day of drafting, with the equanimity of a creature who had watched many constitutions be written, no document that is actually implemented is perfect. The perfect document is the one that was never tested. What the charter was honest, it said what it meant, it addressed specific failures with specific remedies, and it was grounded in the same fundamental principle that Merlin had written into the protocol 11 centuries ago: power wielded in council grows outward and becomes a nation. There was a footstep in the hallway. Sirius appeared in the library doorway in a dressing gown, with the particular look of someone who had also been awake and had found a light on under a door and followed it. "Can't sleep either," Harry said. "Haven't slept properly in 15 years, Sirius said, with the easiness of someone who has made his peace with a fact. "Azkaban rewires the sleep. Still getting it back." He came in and sat across from Harry and looked at the charter draft on the table. "Is it ready?" "As ready as it's going to be," Harry said. Sirius reached out and touched the edge of the document, not reading it, just touching it, the way you touch something you want to confirm is real. "Your dad would have done something like this," he said. Not the same, James was less patient, he'd have wanted everything at once. But the impulse. The impulse to actually fix it rather than work around it. He looked up. Lily would have written it better. "Hermione wrote most of the language," Harry said. "Then Lily would have liked Hermione," Sirius said. "Which she did, actually, in the version of the future she was always hoping for." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about the fact that they didn't get to see this. Any of it." "I know," Harry said. "Is that selfish? To want them to have seen it?" "No," Harry said. "It's human." Sirius looked at him. "You've gotten very wise," he said. "When did that happen?" "I had a lot of uninterrupted thinking time in the last 3 weeks," Harry said. "No Dursleys, no Voldemort on the immediate horizon, no Umbridge. It turns out if you take away the constant low-grade crisis, the brain does things." Sirius laughed, real and warm, the laugh Harry had heard at Grimmauld Place, the laugh that was the best version of his godfather audible. "That's probably true." They sat in the library in the small hours with the charter between them and the manor quiet around them, and didn't talk much, and it was the most comfortable silence Harry had spent in a room with another person in as long as he could remember. The Wisengamot session was called for 9 in the morning on a Thursday, full membership mandatory under the Sovereign's authority, which was the first formal use Harry had made of the compulsory attendance provision. Bones had sent the summons. The wording was precise: full session required at the direction of the Sovereign of Magic for the presentation and ratification of the Sovereign's Charter. Attendance compulsory. Absence without medical documentation will be noted in the permanent record. That last sentence had been Hermione's addition, and Harry had kept it because it was exactly right. They arrived early, Harry, Ron, Hermione, Sirius, and Dumbledore, which was a group of people whose combined presence in a room tended to rearrange the architecture of the situation before anyone had said a word. The chamber was filling when they came in, the same tiered circle, the same stone and gravity, but different in character than Harry's previous visits, less emergency, more occasion. The members arriving knew what they were here for. The summons had included a summary of the Charter's principal provisions, which Harry had insisted on because springing it as a surprise was the kind of political theater he had no interest in. People had had a week to read it. That meant the conversation today would be real rather than reactive. He walked down through the tiers and stood in the center of the chamber floor, and the room found its quiet around him the way rooms did now when he was in them, not because anyone was afraid, but because something in the ambient magical presence he carried drew attention the way a fire draws eyes. Amelia Bones brought the session to order and formally recognized the sovereign's floor. "I'm not going to make a long speech," Harry said. The chamber was very still. "You've read the charter. You know what's in it. I'm going to tell you why it exists and then I'm going to tell you what happens next." He looked around the room, at the faces he recognized, the ones he didn't, the neutral and the resistant and the cautiously open. The sovereignty protocol activated because the governing structures of magical Britain became so corrupt that the magic underpinning this society recognized an existential threat, he said. "That's not my assessment. That's Merlin's design, working as intended. I did not ask for this. I am not going to apologize for it." He let that settle. "What I am going to do is use the authority it gives me to build something that works better than what we've had." A member in the upper tiers, Barnabas Cuff's faction, Harry had been briefed, raised a hand. The charter's election provisions would effectively, "I'll take questions after," Harry said, not unkindly. "Let me finish." The member lowered his hand. "The charter removes blood status as a legal category," Harry said. "Not because blood doesn't matter to people, it clearly does, and people's private beliefs are their own business. But because the codification of it in law has been the engine of the worst things this society has done to itself in the last 300 years. It was used to enable a man who wasn't even pureblood to build an army twice in 40 years. It was used to imprison innocent people. It was used to keep an entire community of beings." He looked at the goblin representative who, in a first for Wisengamot sessions, was seated in a formal observer position at the edge of the chamber floor, from full legal recognition in the society their labor and intelligence helped build. He turned slightly. "The restructured Wisengamot gives this body more legitimacy, not less. A chamber where every seat is hereditary and hereditary only is a chamber that represents families, not the magical community. The families are already represented, they keep a third of the seats. The elected seats represent everyone else. The merit seats represent expertise. That's a body that can actually govern." He looked at the Malfoy faction's remnant, 3 members now, without Lucius, and without the confidence of numbers. "I know some of you are going to argue that this is a radical restructuring. That it's too fast, too broad, too disruptive to institutions that have served this community for centuries. Some of those arguments are made in genuine good faith and deserve genuine response, which is why the charter includes a 2-year transition period for implementation of the electoral provisions." He paused. "Some of them are made because the current structure benefits specific people and those people would prefer it not to change. I understand that motivation. But I want to be clear, the charter is going forward. The question before this body today is not whether it passes. It's whether this chamber ratifies it with genuine engagement or whether it gets implemented over your collective procedural objections, which it can be, which I'd rather avoid because the transition will be smoother with cooperation." The silence in the chamber was dense. "Questions," Harry said. "The floor is open." What followed was 2 hours of the most sustained political argument Harry had ever been part of, conducted at the speed of people who are very practiced at it and who have a week's worth of prepared objections to deploy. The questions came from every direction, some hostile, some genuinely curious, some tactical probes looking for vulnerabilities in specific provisions. Harry answered the ones he could answer directly. For the ones that were technically complex, he deferred to Hermione, who was sitting in the gallery with notes and who had clearly been waiting for exactly this and responded to each question with the focused precision of someone who had spent 10 days anticipating the objections and had pre-drafted responses. For the ones that were bad faith stalling, he was blunter. The provision restricting individuals under criminal investigation from holding Wisengamot seats, said a witch named Edith Flint, who Harry knew from Bones's briefings had family connections to 3 of the documented Death Eater-funded seats, creates a procedural mechanism that could be weaponized against legitimate members through fabricated. The provision applies to formal criminal charges filed through standard ministry procedure with a standard evidentiary threshold, Harry said. If your concern is fabricated charges, the answer is that we also have judicial reform provisions that raise the evidentiary standard for formal charges. Both provisions protect the same principle. They just protect it from different directions. Flint opened her mouth. If your concern, Harry said, still conversationally, is specifically about members whose family connections are currently under Bones's audit, I'd encourage you to consider whether the most effective response to that situation is arguing against transparency provisions in a public forum. Flint closed her mouth. The debate found its rhythm. By the end of the first hour, the nature of the objections had shifted from foundational, this shouldn't exist, to structural, this specific provision needs refinement, which was the shift Harry had been working toward, because it meant the broad principle had been accepted and the argument was now about implementation, which was manageable. There were legitimate objections. The electoral provision had a technical gap in how it handled contested returns that Gringotts had flagged and Harry had not fully resolved. A member named Tiberius McLagan, whose political instincts were sharp even if his values were mixed, identified the same gap and proposed a solution that was actually better than the placeholder language in the current draft. Harry incorporated it on the spot, which produced a visible ripple of surprise in the chamber. The expectation had been that the sovereign would present and defend, not actually listen. The charter is a document, Harry said, when the McLagan amendment was noted. Not a decree. It benefits from better ideas. If you have them, I want to hear them. That changed the room. Not dramatically, politics doesn't change dramatically except in retrospect. But the quality of the engagement shifted, and in the next 40 minutes, for more substantive improvements were proposed and accepted, and the document being voted on at the end of the session was meaningfully better than the one Harry had walked in with. He had known this would happen. Hermione had said, on the third day of drafting, the charter won't be perfect. Leave space for the chamber to improve it. People vote for things they've shaped. She was right. She was almost always right, which Harry had long since stopped finding surprising. The vote, when Bones called it, was 51 in favor, 12 against, and 4 abstentions. 51 to 12. The margin was not even close. Harry stood in the center of the chamber floor while Bones read the final count and felt the charter settle into legal reality around him, not metaphorically, but actually, in the way that the protocol let him feel the magical structure of British governance. Something clicked into place. A framework aligning with a foundation, the way a building locks onto its groundwork in the final stage of construction. The 12 who voted against were already on their feet with formal objections. 3 of them had the procedural timing right, official dissent, registered for the record, which was their legal right and which Harry had made sure the charter explicitly protected because a document that didn't allow for legitimate dissent was not a document worth defending. The other 9 were staging the kind of performative objection that hoped volume would substitute for votes. Harry let them register the formal ones and waited for the rest to exhaust themselves. It didn't take long. The count was the count. For the record, Harry said, when the room had settled, the 12 dissenting votes will be documented in the Charter's ratification record, not as a note of defeat but because minority positions in a democratic body are part of the historical record and deserve to be there. He looked at the 12 members. If the implementation of any Charter provision creates practical problems you can document, I want to hear about them through proper channels. That's not a courtesy. That's how this is supposed to work. 2 of the 12 looked like they hadn't expected that. One of them, a woman named Augusta Longbottom who had voted against on the grounds that the electoral provision timelines were too compressed, a legitimate objection that Harry suspected was genuinely what it seemed, gave him a single nod of acknowledgement that was worth something. Outside the chamber, in the corridor, the ministry was in the specific state of controlled excitement that civil servants produce when something large has just happened and they are all processing it simultaneously while trying to maintain the appearance of professional calm. Harry moved through it with Ron and Hermione and Sirius, and the people they passed parted naturally, not out of fear, out of the particular deference given to someone who has just done something significant in the room next door. Sirius walked beside Harry with the quality of someone who had a great deal to say and was choosing to let the moment be what it was rather than describe it. Ron had his hands in his pockets and his shoulders relaxed in the way that meant he had been holding tension for the duration of the session and was now releasing it, and was privately very pleased about how it had gone, which he would express in approximately 20 minutes when the formal aura of the situation had dissipated enough for him to say something direct about it. Hermione was already writing in her notebook. "You're not going to stop writing until we're back at the manor, are you?" Ron said to her. "I need to capture the McLaggen Amendment language before I forget the exact phrasing," she said, without looking up. "You have perfect recall." "I have excellent recall." "Perfect would mean I wouldn't need the notebook." She wrote another line. "The electoral provision still has 2 minor implementation gaps that McLaggen's amendment didn't address. I want to draft supplementary language while the session is fresh." Ron looked at Harry. "She's going to be like this for the rest of the day." "I know," Harry said. "She's been like this since 1991. It's not a new development." "I can hear you," Hermione said, still writing. They came out through the ministry's main atrium and into the late morning air of Whitehall, and Harry stopped for a moment on the steps. Not for drama, he was done with drama, or at least with performing it. He stopped because the day was extraordinary and clear and he wanted to feel it without moving through it. The charter was law. Not symbolically. Actually. Ratified by the Wisengamot, backed by sovereign authority, grounded in the oldest constitutional framework in British magical history. The implementation would take months and some of it would take years, and there would be setbacks and complications and people who found ways to work against the spirit of what had been written even while technically complying with the letter of it, because that was how people were and how governance worked and how change actually moved through institutions. But the charter was law. Harry thought about Sirius locked in Azkaban for 12 years while the world moved around him without correcting its mistake. He thought about Hermione's parents, dentists in a London suburb who had raised a daughter who was the most magically gifted witch of her generation and had been told, by 1,000 little signals from the world she'd walked into, that her origins made her lesser. He thought about Neville's parents in St. Mungo's, about a ministry too afraid and too compromised to pursue justice. He thought about Cedric, and about the cottage at Godric's Hollow, and about a small boy in a cupboard under stairs who had gone to sleep every night not knowing he was the sovereign of magic. He thought about his parents' names on the memorial plaque, and whether this was what they would have wanted. He decided it was close enough. "Right," he said, turning to Ron and Hermione and Sirius. "Lunch." "Lunch," Ron confirmed immediately, with the enthusiasm of someone for whom food was a reliable constant in an uncertain world. "There's that place on Diagon Alley," Sirius said. "Opened a few years back. I haven't been anywhere for food in 15 years, I'm prepared to have opinions about everything." "You've been free for 3 weeks, Hermione said, putting her notebook away. "That's 3 weeks of opinions I've been storing up," Sirius said. "The place with the courtyard. I've been thinking about their lamb pie since approximately 1993. Harry laughed, real and unguarded, the kind that came from somewhere uncomplicated. "Then we're going there." They apparat to Diagon Alley and the afternoon did what afternoons do, it continued, unhurried, into a lunch that ran 2 hours because nobody was in a hurry to end it, and the conversation moved through the session and the charter and the McLaggen Amendment and the 12 dissenting votes and what implementation would actually look like in practice, and it was the conversation of people who had done something real and were now living in the immediate aftermath of it, which is its own particular pleasure. Toward the end of lunch, when the lamb pie had been well received and Sirius had indeed produced opinions about several things and the afternoon light was at the angle that meant it was later than it felt, Ron said, out of nowhere, in the tone of someone who has been sitting with a thought for a while, "Do you remember second year? When we thought you were the heir of Slytherin?" Harry looked at him. "I remember." "I never actually thought you were," Ron said. "I want to be clear about that. I was worried for about 20 minutes and then I decided you weren't." 20 minutes is a long time, Harry said. It was a strange 20 minutes, Ron agreed. The point is, he looked at Harry, and his expression had the quality that Ron's expressions got when he was saying something he had been thinking about seriously. The point is that from second year on, there was always something. Always a reason to be afraid or suspicious or uncertain. And now there isn't. This is who you were supposed to be. And it's good. It's just good. Harry looked at his best friend across the lunch table in Diagon Alley on a Thursday afternoon in July. Yeah, he said. It is. Hermione had her elbow on the table and her chin in her hand and was looking between them with an expression that was warm and slightly exasperated in the way of someone who has watched two people understand something she worked out several years ago. I want it noted, she said, that I've been saying Harry was exactly who he was supposed to be since the start. You've been saying Harry was going to cause an enormous amount of administrative complexity since the start, Ron said. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, she said. No, Harry agreed. They really aren't. Across Diagon Alley, a copy of the Daily Prophet was already rotating in the newsstand window with the afternoon edition, the headline visible from where they sat, Sovereign's Charter Ratified, Magical Britain Enters New ERA. Below it, in slightly smaller type, full text of charter provisions. Reaction from across the Wizengamot. Comment from Amelia Bones, head of MLE. It was not, Harry noted, a perfect headline. It was a little dramatic, a little breathless, the kind of framing that flattened complexity into occasion. But it was on the front page and the text was in it and people were picking up copies as he watched, reading on the steps of shops and at outdoor tables and in passing, and whatever they made of it, they were reading it. That was something. That evening, Harry sat in the library at Sovereign's Rest and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Helena Avery Price in Edinburgh, who had received Bones's notification about her bloodline connection and the attempted ritual with the combination of shock and anger that were entirely appropriate responses, and who had written to Harry asking what she should do now. He told her, nothing specifically required, but that her Peveril descent was documented in the Sovereign's records if she ever wanted to explore the family history, and that the threat was neutralized, and that he was sorry she'd been put in danger by something that had nothing to do with any choice she'd made. The second was to Neville Longbottom, who was spending the summer at his grandmother's and who Harry had been meaning to write for 2 weeks. He told Neville what had happened, the short version, the real version, not the headline version, and that the judicial reform provisions in the Charter included a formal review process for cases involving coerced confessions or incomplete investigation, and that the Longbottom case fell squarely within those parameters, and that Amelia Bones was already aware and would be in contact with Augusta Longbottom through proper channels. He sealed it and then unsealed it and added, also, you were right about the herbology thing. You're better at it than you think. Neville would know what he meant. The third letter was harder to write. He sat with blank parchment in front of him for 10 minutes, and then wrote, Dear Voldemort. Looked at it. Crossed it out. Tried Tom Riddle. Felt more honest. Kept it. He wrote 3 paragraphs. Not a challenge. Not a declaration. Not an ultimatum. He wrote, the Charter is law. The structures you've been exploiting, the blood status mythology, the ministry corruption, the Wizengamot seats bought with your funding, they're being dismantled. Not because of you. In spite of you. The world you wanted to preside over is being rebuilt into something you couldn't lead even if we let you. I know what's between us. I know how it ends. I'm not afraid of it. But I want you to know, before we get there, that none of what you built has survived you. It was always going to be this way. Not because of the prophecy. Because you chose power over everything else, and power over everything else is an instruction for destroying the things worth having. When the time comes, I'll be ready. Harry Potter. He sealed it, warded it with a trace that would tell him when it was read, and left it on the table. He would send it in the morning or not send it at all, depending on how it looked in daylight. Some things needed to be written to be thought through. Whether they needed to be sent was a separate question. He went to bed at midnight and slept without difficulty, which was the most ordinary miracle of the past 3 weeks. In the morning, he left the letter on the table. Some things could wait. The work that couldn't was already moving, the charter's implementation team being organized by Bones, the electoral provision regulations being drafted by Grimtooth and Hermione in parallel, Sirius preparing for the formal reinvestiture of the Black family seat under the new charter provisions, Dumbledore composing the honest account he had promised and which Harry already knew would be difficult and would take him some time and would be worth every page. Harry ate breakfast in the kitchen of Sovereign's Rest and read through the day's correspondence. There was a great deal of it now, from people across the magical community who had read the charter and had responses ranging from grateful to furious to thoughtful to bewildered, and made notes in his journal. Ron came in and made toast. Hermione arrived already mid-sentence, finishing a thought she'd apparently been having in the hallway, because the 2-year transition gives us a window to establish the electoral oversight body before the first vote cycle, which means we need the appointment framework completed by. She looked up and found Harry and Ron both looking at her. "Good morning," she added. "Good morning," Harry said. "Toast?" Ron offered. "Please." She sat down and opened her notebook and then closed it again, deliberately, and looked at Harry. "How are you feeling?" "Actually." Harry considered the question. Not the political answer or the strategic answer or the answer that referenced what still needed doing, those were all real and present, but the actual answer. "Like I know what I'm for," he said. "Which is new." Hermione looked at him for a moment, and then she smiled, not the small professional smile she used when something had gone well procedurally, but the real one, the one Harry had seen exactly twice before in 6 years and which meant she was genuinely, uncomplicated, deeply glad. "Good," she said. "That's very good." Outside, the manor grounds were in the kind of July morning that Wiltshire occasionally produced, properly warm, the kind of warmth that felt earned rather than incidental, with the light coming through the windows at the angle that turned the kitchen into something bright and easy. The Sovereign's charter was law. Sirius Black was free. The world that had been built on a lie was being taken apart, carefully, piece by piece, with the full attention of people who intended to build something honest in its place. Harry drank his tea and thought about what came next, and it was not nothing, and it was not finished, and it was not easy. But it was, for the first time in his life, genuinely, entirely his.